Hey there, welcome back to the channel. Today I have a bunch of new stories for you. Let's start right away with the first one. It is titled, I was the only person who cared for my wife's sick father in his final days. After my wife and her sisters dumped him and left at his will reading, my wife and her sisters got his multi-million business. I got the rundown farmhouse. My wife mocked me. Should have taken better care of him. Then the lawyer said, actually. My wife went white at what came next. Look, I'm not saying my wife's family is heartless, but when my father-in-law, Richard Hawthorne, got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, they disappeared faster than my paycheck after bills are due. I mean, we're talking Olympic-level ghosting here. Usain Bolt couldn't have bolted that quick. My wife Melissa, bless her designer handbag-loving heart, sat me down in our kitchen the day after Richard's doctor delivered the news and said with a completely straight face, Travis, I just can't handle hospitals emotionally. The smell of antiseptic makes me nauseous, and watching someone deteriorate is too traumatic for my mental health. She said this while scrolling through Instagram, double-tapping photos of someone's vacation in Santorini. Real broken up about it. You know, her therapist had apparently greenlit this level of avoidance, which I'm pretty sure isn't how therapy is supposed to work. But hey, I'm just the guy who married into this circus. Her sisters were even better. Tiffany, the middle child who works in brand consulting, which as far as I can tell means she takes selfies and calls it market research, suddenly discovered an urgent work trip to Austin that absolutely could not be rescheduled. It's a major client, Travis. She explained over speakerphone, her voice dripping with fake regret. They're launching a new athleisure line. And I'm the only one who understands their vision, right? Because what dying father wouldn't understand that yoga pants wait for no man? Lauren, the youngest and definitely the most dramatic, claimed she had to go to Seattle for 6 months for a digital nomad intensive retreat that cost more than my truck. When I asked what exactly you intensively retreat from for half a year, she got all huffy and said I wouldn't understand the millennial struggle for authentic self-discovery. She's 34. The millennial excuse is getting pretty worn out. Lauren, so that left me. Travis Donovan, the son-in-law everyone had spent the last 8 years calling Mr. Average at family gatherings, usually right before asking if I could fix their garbage disposal or hang some shelves. I'm a contractor, which in the Hawthorne family hierarchy ranks somewhere between the gardener and that weird cousin nobody invites to weddings. Richard himself had spent years introducing me as the handyman with no ambition. Usually, while wearing a smirk that suggested he found my entire existence mildly amusing at best. But here's the thing about people vanishing. When stuff gets real, somebody's got to stay. And apparently that somebody was me. The first week was brutal, not going to lie. Richard had moved into hospice care at his massive house in the suburbs, the kind of place with more bathrooms than I have friends. The nurses would come by twice a day, but the rest of the time, that was all me, baby. Feeding him soup that he'd complained tasted like dishwater that gave up on life. Helping him to the bathroom, which let me tell you, does wonders for any illusions you had about dignity. Adjusting his oxygen tanks while he barked orders like a retired general who'd never quite accepted retirement. Not that tube, the other one. He'd wheeze. Did you even read the manual or are you just winging it like you wing everything else? I'm winging it with style, Richard. I'd shoot back. That's the Travis Donovan guarantee. He'd grunt, which I learned was his version of a laugh. The house felt like a mausoleum most days. 2,300 square feet of marble floors and uncomfortable furniture that looked expensive, but felt like sitting on decorative rocks. Melissa would call maybe twice a week, always during her lunch break, always sounding distracted. How's Dad doing? She'd ask. And before I could answer with anything more detailed than fine, she'd already be moving on to tell me about some drama at her Pilates class or how her Tesla needed charging. But then something weird started happening around week 3. Richard stopped being such a colossal pain in my ass. We'd watch old westerns together on his ridiculously oversized TV, the kind where John Wayne looked like he could step right out of the screen and ask for a beer. Richard knew every line from The Searchers and would whisper them along with the actors, his voice raspy but determined. During commercial breaks, he'd tell me stories about growing up poor in Oklahoma, about building his textile company from nothing, about mistakes he'd made and people he trusted who didn't deserve it. My daughters, he said one night, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. I gave them everything. Private schools, cars, college funds that could have bought small islands. You know what they learned? How to spend it. I offered. He actually smiled at that. How to expect it. There's a difference, Travis. A big one. I brought him butterscotch pudding that night because the nurses said he needed more calories and he'd complained it tasted like sweetened regret, which honestly wasn't wrong, but he ate it anyway. And we sat in comfortable silence watching Clint Eastwood squint at people for justice. The nurses, Deborah and Patricia, started calling me the good son, which made me laugh because I wasn't even a real son, just the disposable son-in-law who'd drawn the short straw. Deborah, a no-nonsense woman from Jamaica with arms that could probably bench press me, told me one afternoon while checking Richard's vitals. Most families, they run away from death like it's contagious. But you show up every day. That man notices. Trust me, honey, he notices everything. Richard's neighbor, an elderly widower named Frank, who still mowed his own lawn at 83, would wave at me when I'd arrive each morning. "You're doing a good thing, son," he'd call out. Most people these days don't know what loyalty looks like anymore. I'd wave back, wondering if loyalty was the right word or if I was just too stubborn to abandon someone everybody else had written off. Sometimes late at night when the morphine made Richard chatty and philosophical, he'd grab my wrist with surprising strength for a dying man and look at me with eyes that were still sharp despite everything. "You're the only one who shows up, kid," he'd say. His voice barely above a whisper. "Remember that? You're the only damn one." I'd nod, uncomfortable with the intensity of it, figuring it was just the drugs talking. Old man getting sentimental as the end approached. We all cope differently, right? But here's what I didn't know then. Sitting in that oversized house, watching a millionaire slowly fade away while his actual family sent occasional thoughts and prayers texts. Richard Hawthorne wasn't the kind of man who said things he didn't mean, medicated or not. And he definitely wasn't the kind of man who forgot who showed up when it mattered and who didn't. Turns out the old man had been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. And I was about to become his checkmate. Richard died on a Thursday morning at 6:47 a.m. right when I was in his kitchen microwaving chicken noodle soup because he complained the night before that everything tasted like cardboard. And Campbell was apparently the only thing that still had a soul. I heard the monitor alarm from upstairs, that long flat beep that sounds exactly like what you'd imagine the end sounds like. And I knew before I even climbed those stairs that the old man was gone. Deborah, the night nurse, was already there checking for a pulse she knew she wouldn't find. Her face professional but sad. "He went peacefully," she told me, her hand on my shoulder in his sleep. "That's a blessing, honey." I nodded, staring at Richard's face, which looked weirdly younger without all that pain carved into it. He looked like he'd finally won an argument nobody else knew he was having. I called Melissa at 7:02 a.m. 15 minutes felt like the appropriate amount of time to sit with death before dealing with the living, you know. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up, her voice thick with sleep and irritation. "Travis, it's 700 in the morning. What's wrong?" "Your dad passed away," I said quietly about 20 minutes ago peacefully in his sleep. There was a pause. Not the kind of pause where someone's processing grief or shock. More like the pause you take when you're calculating something. Then she said, and I swear on everything I own this is verbatim. "Oh, okay. I'll call Tiffany and Lauren. We need to get ready because this means the company's ours now." Not, "Oh my God." Not, "I'll be right there." Not even a single sob or sharp intake of breath. Just immediate business mode. Like her father's death was an email notification about a stock dividend. "Melissa," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Your dad just died. Maybe we could have I don't know, 5 minutes of being human before we talk about corporate structure." "Don't be dramatic, Travis." She snapped suddenly wide awake. "This is how adult business families handle things. We grieve, yes, but we also have to think practically. Dad would have wanted us to be smart about this, right? Richard would have definitely wanted his death to be treated like a hostile takeover opportunity. Totally his vibe." She arrived 2 hours later in a black Chanel suit that looked suspiciously fresh off the rack. Her makeup perfect, her hair blown out like she was attending a red carpet event for grief. Tiffany and Lauren showed up within the hour. Both of them wearing designer sunglasses indoors like they were celebrities dodging paparazzi instead of daughters who'd ignored their father for 6 months while he rotted away. They hugged each other in the foyer. This weird group hug that looked rehearsed. And I swear I heard Tiffany whisper "finally free." Lauren was already on her phone probably texting her followers about this difficult time with some filtered selfie where she looked beautifully tragic. The funeral planning was something else entirely. We're talking Shark Tank funeral edition, except the product being pitched was their fake grief, and the investors were anyone who might judge them for being terrible daughters. Melissa took charge immediately, booking the most expensive funeral home in the county, the kind of place with fountains in the lobby, and staff who spoke in hushed tones like they were working at a luxury spa for the dead. "We need it to reflect Dad's status," Melissa announced at the planning meeting. Sitting across from a funeral director named Craig who had the kind of beard that screamed, "I take our Teasel coffee very seriously." He was a pillar of the business community. "This needs to be memorable. Memorable like he was, or memorable like a LinkedIn post, I muttered. But nobody heard me because Tiffany was already debating flower arrangements like she was competing on a reality show. White roses are so predictable, Tiffany said, flipping through a catalog. What about orchids? They're more sophisticated, more dad. Lauren looked up from her phone. Can we do a digital memorial wall where people can post photos like interactive? I could live stream parts of it for people who can't make it. I stared at her. You want to live stream your father's funeral? It's called being inclusive, Travis. She shot back. Not everyone can travel. This way, his legacy reaches more people. It's what the modern grieving process looks like. The modern grieving process apparently also included Tiffany wearing a white suit to the funeral because, as she explained to anyone who'd listen, white is a symbol of purity and new beginnings in many cultures. I read about it in a Goop article. It felt right. She looked like she was either attending a very confused wedding or auditioning for a cult. I half expected her to start handing out cleansing crystals. The funeral itself was held on a Saturday at St. Michael's Episcopal Church, a gorgeous old building with stained glass, and enough wood paneling to make a lumberjack weep. About 200 people showed up, mostly business associates, country club friends, and people who probably owed Richard money at some point. Frank, the neighbor, sat in the back pew and gave me a knowing nod when our eyes met. Melissa gave the eulogy, walking up to the podium in heels so high I'm pretty sure they violated several physics laws. She cleared her throat, looked out at the crowd with practiced emotion, and began. My father was a complicated man. I almost laughed out loud. Complicated man is universal code for we barely spoke, but I need to sound deep and introspective right now. It's the eulogy equivalent of it's not you, it's me, she continued, her voice wavering in all the right places. He taught us the value of hard work, the importance of family, and the meaning of perseverance. 3 things she'd actively ignored her entire adult life. But sure, let's go with that narrative. He built an empire from nothing, and his legacy will live on through all of us who loved him. Tiffany dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue. Lauren was absolutely filming this on her phone. I could see the red recording light from where I sat 3 rows back. Someone's Instagram stories were about to get very morbid. When it was over, people lined up to offer condolences, shaking hands with the daughters like they'd just survived a natural disaster instead of a carefully orchestrated performance. I stood off to the side near Richard's coffin, this obscenely expensive mahogany number with gold handles that probably cost more than my yearly salary. I looked down at him, peaceful in his final suit, and remembered our last real conversation 3 days before he died. He'd grabbed my hand, his grip weak but determined, and said, "They're going to act like they loved me, Travis. They're going to cry pretty tears and say pretty words. Don't believe a damn second of it. You know who I really was. You're the only one who stayed when staying was hard." I told him to save his strength, that he shouldn't worry about any of this. But he'd shaken his head, adamant. "I'm not worried, kid. I'm prepared." Big difference. Standing there at his funeral, watching his daughters work the room like it was a networking event. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. It wasn't exactly sadness, though there was grief mixed in there somewhere. It was more like anticipation, like waiting for a punchline you know is coming but can't quite predict. Richard Hawthorne had been a lot of things. Stubborn, judgmental, brutally honest, occasionally mean. But he'd never been stupid and he'd definitely never been careless. A man who'd built a multi-million-dollar empire from Oklahoma dirt didn't just die without having every last detail figured out. And something told me watching Melissa Eyre kiss someone from the garden club that Richard's final move was going to be his masterpiece. The old man always did love a good plot twist. 3 days after we buried Richard, we all assembled at the law offices of Henderson and Blay like we were gathering for the world's most passive-aggressive book club meeting. The office was located downtown in one of those buildings that screams, "We charge by the minute." And our water costs $8 a bottle. All glass and steel and uncomfortable modern furniture that looked like it was designed by someone who hated the human spine. The conference room on the 14th floor had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A table so polished you could see your existential crisis reflected in it and that distinct smell that expensive places have. A mixture of leather, money, and the faint desperation of people trying to prove they belong there. There were bottles of fancy water nobody would drink, and a coffee station with one of those machines that sounds like it's launching a small spacecraft every time you press a button. Melissa strutted in like she was walking a runway, wearing a black Armani dress that probably cost more than my mortgage payment, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the confidence of someone who'd already mentally spent her inheritance 3 times over. She brought her Louis Vuitton tote bag, the one she called her power bag, which I'm pretty sure is just a regular bag that costs $4,000 and gives you an inflated sense of self-importance. Tiffany arrived 5 minutes later in head toto Prada because apparently grief has a dress code and that code is aggressively expensive. She was carrying her iPad because she couldn't go 5 minutes without checking her brand metrics, which is what she calls obsessively monitoring how many people liked her latest post about green juice or manifesting abundance or whatever cult-adjacent wellness trend she's peddling this week. Lauren showed up last, naturally wearing vintage Gucci and those ridiculous oversized sunglasses that make people look like fashionable insects. She immediately started setting up her phone on a little tripod because God forbid she experience a major life moment without documenting it for her 12,000 followers who definitely cared deeply about her inheritance drama. "Lauren, you cannot film this," Melissa hissed, her smile tight. "It's a legal proceeding." "It's my truth, Melissa," Lauren replied, not looking up from adjusting her ring light. "My followers have been on this journey with me. They deserve closure, too." "Your followers don't deserve," I said, dropping into a chair at the far end of the table. "They're strangers on the internet who watch you eat salads and complain about flight delays." She finally looked at me, her expression wounded in that performative way influencers have perfected. "You wouldn't understand the responsibility of having a platform, Travis." "You're right," I said. "I'm too busy living in reality to understand pretend responsibility." Mr. Henderson walked in before Lauren could fire back, saving us all from what I'm sure would have been a riveting debate about authentic engagement and algorithmic reach. Charles Henderson was about 65 with silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of face that had seen every family fight imaginable and stopped being surprised by human awfulness sometime during the Reagan administration. He was carrying a leather folder that looked older than me and had the weight of someone about to referee a cage match disguised as estate planning. "Ladies, gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone lawyers use when they're professionally required to pretend everyone in the room is civilized. "Thank you for coming. I know this is a difficult time." Melissa literally couldn't help herself. "Let's just get to it, Charles. We're all adults here. We know why we're gathered, right? Adults. That's definitely the word I'd use for 3 women who'd abandoned their dying father and were now practically salivating over his money like it was the last Black Friday sale at Nordstrom. Mr. Henderson sat down, opened the folder with the reverence of someone handling a historical document and pulled out Richard's will. It was typed on fancy paper with an embossed letterhead because even in death, Richard Hawthorne wasn't doing anything halfway. The lawyer cleared his throat in that dramatic way they must teach in law school. Right between how to bill in 6-minute increments and making your voice sound ominous for effect. "The last will and testament of Richard James Hawthorne," he began, and I swear the room temperature dropped 5 degrees from the collective intensity of everyone's attention. "Written on March 15th of this year and witnessed by myself and my partner Gregory Blay." March 15th. The Ides of March. Of course, Richard had updated his will on the day Julius Caesar got stabbed. The man had a flair for symbolic timing. Henderson continued reading through the standard legal jargon that sounds like English, but isn't really all they heretofore and in perpetuity. Stuff that makes you wonder if lawyers are just messing with us. Then he got to the good part, his voice taking on that slow dramatic cadence that lawyers apparently love using for plot twists. "To my daughters, Melissa and Hawthorne Donovan, Tiffany Marie Hawthorne, and Lauren Elizabeth Hawthorne, I leave controlling shares of Hawthorne Textiles Incorporated to be divided equally among the 3 of them, valued at approximately $12.6 million. Melissa actually clapped. I'm not exaggerating. She brought her hands together in genuine applause like she'd just watched a kindergarten play and wanted to encourage the performers. The sound echoed in the conference room and for a second everyone just stared at her. "Sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. This is wonderful news. Dad really did love us." Tiffany reached over and high-fived her. An actual high-five at a reading. I was witnessing the death of decorum in real time, and honestly, I was kind of impressed by the audacity. Lauren had her phone out typing furiously, probably crafting the perfect caption about legacy and family and gratitude that would accompany whatever filtered photo she'd post later. Something like, "Forever grateful for the lessons Daddy taught us about building empires and believing in family." With 17 emojis and a link to her Amazon storefront, Mr. Henderson waited for them to finish their celebration, his face carefully neutral in that way that suggested he'd seen this exact scenario play out 100 times with 100 different terrible families. Then he continued reading and his eyes flicked toward me for just a second. "And to my son-in-law, Travis Michael Donovan, I leave the family farmhouse and surrounding property at 82 Willow Creek Road, including all structures, land, and contents therein." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a designer handbag drop. Then Melissa snorted. Not a gentle laugh, but an actual snort-laugh combo that sounded like a pig questioning your life choices. "You got the dump, Trav," she said, barely containing her glee. The old falling apart farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. Should have taken better care of him. Maybe you would have gotten something actually valuable. Tiffany joined in, giggling behind her hand. Oh my God, that place is a disaster. The roof leaks, the plumbing is from like the Civil War era, and I'm pretty sure there are raccoons living in the attic. Dad used to joke about tearing it down. At least you got something, Lauren added with fake sympathy, finally looking up from her phone. I mean, it's not $12 million in stock, but you could probably sell it for like what, 50 grand? Maybe 75 if you find someone really desperate. They were laughing now, all three of them, feeding off each other's cruelty like hyenas who just found wounded prey. Melissa was wiping tears from her eyes, her mascara smudging slightly. This is perfect. This is actually perfect. The handyman gets the handyman special. It's so poetic. I sat there absorbing their mockery, feeling my face get hot, but keeping my expression neutral. I'd learned a long time ago that the best response to the Hawthorne sisters when they got like this was to give them nothing. No reaction, no ammunition, just let them exhaust themselves on their own superiority complex. But Mr. Henderson wasn't laughing. In fact, he was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between curiosity and what might have been respect. He cleared his throat loudly, professionally, cutting through their cackling like a judge's gavel. Actually, he said, his voice suddenly sharp enough to slice through their celebration like a hot knife through their designer egos. There's more. The laughter stopped immediately. All three sisters turned to look at him, their smiles faltering like someone had just announced the store was out of their favorite Roy flavor. What do you mean more? Melissa asked, her voice tight. Mr. Henderson reached into his folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. It was cream-colored, expensive-looking paper, and across the front in Richard's distinctive shaky handwriting was my name. Travis Michael Donovan. Your father requested that Travis read this privately, Henderson said, sliding the envelope across the Polish table toward me. It contains additional instructions regarding his bequest. I picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of it, the thickness suggesting multiple pages inside. Through the paper, I could feel something small and metal. A key maybe. Melissa's smile had completely vanished now, replaced by something harder, more calculating. What kind of additional instructions? Charles, we have a right to know what's in our father's will. You know everything that pertains to you, Henderson replied calmly. This is a private communication between Mr. Hawthorne and his son-in-law. Perfectly legal, I assure you. I pocketed the envelope, feeling all three sisters' eyes boring into me like laser beams of suspicion and barely contained rage. Melissa leaned toward me, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow sounded more threatening than if she'd yelled. Don't get too excited, Travis. It's probably instructions on how to maintain that piece of crap property. Or maybe the code to his antique tractor. Dad always did have a weird sense of humor about worthless things. I looked at her, really looked at her and smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small one, the kind that says, I know something you don't, and it's killing you. Yeah, I said quietly. Maybe it runs on karma. She didn't laugh. None of them did. And for the first time since Richard died, I felt something close to hope. I waited until I was in my truck before opening the envelope because there was no way in hell I was giving Melissa and her designer-clad vulture sisters the satisfaction of watching me read whatever Richard had left me. The parking garage under Henderson and Blaze building was one of those underground concrete mazes that smelled like oil and expensive regret. The kind of place where every sound echoes and makes you feel like you're in a movie about corporate espionage. My truck, a 2015 Ford F1-150 that had seen better days and about 47 different construction sites, looked ridiculously out of place among the Teslas and BMWs, like a working-class hero at a yacht club mixer. I sat there in the driver's seat, engine off, just holding this envelope and feeling the weight of it. The paper was thick, the kind you buy from specialty stores where they ask if you want it hand-pressed or whatever pretentious thing makes paper cost $30 a sheet. Richard's handwriting on the front was shaky but deliberate. My name written with the careful precision of someone who knew these might be some of the last words he'd ever write. My hands were actually trembling a little as I broke the seal, which annoyed me because I'm not typically the trembling type. I build houses for a living. I use power tools that could remove fingers if you sneeze wrong. But something about this moment felt huge, like opening Pandora's box, except hopefully with less unleashing of evil upon humanity, and more finding out why a dying millionaire had given me a farmhouse everyone assumed was worthless. Inside the envelope were three things. A handwritten letter on matching cream stationery, a smaller sealed envelope marked for later, and a brass key that looked old and important. The kind of key that definitely didn't go to anything as mundane as a tractor or a garden shed. It had weight to it, substance, and an ornate design on the handle that looked almost Victorian. I unfolded the letter, And Richard's voice practically jumped off the page. Even his handwriting had attitude. All sharp angles and confident strokes despite the shakiness age and illness had added. Travis, it began because Richard had never been one for dear or any of that sentimental greeting card garbage. If you're reading this, I'm dead. Which means I finally escaped listening to Lauren talk about her brand Synergy or whatever horseshit she's calling it these days. Small mercies. I actually laughed out loud, the sound bouncing off the concrete walls around me. Even from beyond the grave, the old man couldn't resist taking shots at his daughters. The letter continued. If my daughters are laughing right now, and let's be honest, they definitely are. Let them. They think they won. They think they got the empire, the company, the golden ticket to Easy Street. They have no idea what they actually got, but they'll figure it out soon enough. Probably around month 3 when they realize running a textile company requires more than posting pictures on Instagram and attending charity brunches where they pretend to give a damn about literacy or saving the whales or whatever cause is trendy this season. I could picture Richard writing this probably hooked up to oxygen, morphine dripping into his veins, still sharp as a tack and twice as mean. The man had been barely able to walk to the bathroom without assistance. But his mind had stayed clear right up until the end, cataloging every slight, every absence, every fake. I'll visit soon text message his daughters had sent. The farmhouse isn't what it seems, Richard wrote. And I felt my pulse quicken. 82. Willow Creek Road has been in my family for 4 generations. My grandfather built that house with his own hands back in 1924. And every Hawthorne man since has added something to it. My father put in the basement. I added the workshop. But what's under the old cider press in that basement? That's something nobody knows about except me, my accountant, Miriam Lopez, and now you. The old cider press. I remembered it vaguely from the one time Richard had taken me out to the farmhouse about 3 years ago back when he was still healthy and just wanted someone to help him move some furniture. His daughters had deemed too country for their aesthetic. The press had been this massive antique thing in the corner of the basement made of wood and iron and looking like a museum piece from the agricultural revolution. We'd moved boxes around it and I'd asked if it still worked. Everything in that house still works, Richard had said. You just have to know how to use it. At the time, I'd figured he was just being philosophical about old stuff, but now that memory hit different. The letter continued. Go to the basement. Move the cider press. It's on wheels. Easier than it looks. Underneath you'll find a trap door. The brass key opens it. What's inside is what I couldn't trust anyone else with. Travis, you earned it. You sat with a dying old bastard when everyone else found convenient excuses. You changed my oxygen tanks. You made me terrible soup that I complained about but secretly appreciated. And you treated me like a human being instead of a walking ATM or an obligation you could outsource. My throat felt tight reading that, remembering all those nights sitting with Richard, watching Clint Eastwood movies, and listening to him tell stories about building his company from nothing, about the risks he took, the people who doubted him, the times he almost lost everything and somehow clawed his way back. Inside that envelope marked for later, Richard's letter went on, are instructions for what comes next. Don't open it yet. First, go to the farmhouse. See what I left you. Then, and only then, read those instructions. Trust me on this, kid. The order matters. The letter ended with, they thought I was just a senile old man rambling about the past. They thought all I cared about was the company, the legacy, the Hawthorne name. But here's what they never understood. A legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's who you leave it with. Make me proud, Travis. And if you get a chance, tell Melissa that Karma's A with a long memory and excellent accounting skills. R.H. I sat there holding this letter, reading it 3 times, feeling emotions I couldn't quite name. Richard had planned this. Every detail, the farmhouse that everyone mocked, the mysterious inheritance, this entire elaborate setup, it was all intentional. The man had orchestrated his final move like a chess grandmaster playing against opponents who didn't even know they were in a game. My phone buzzed. A text from Melissa. Don't get your hopes up about whatever Dad wrote. He was probably medicated and sentimental. The farmhouse is still a dump. Maybe you can flip it and finally afford a decent vacation. Another buzz. Tiffany. Honestly, Travis, you should thank us for not contesting the will. We could have argued you manipulated Dad in his final days. We're being generous. And Lauren, no hard feelings about the inheritance distribution. Dad knew what he was doing. Some people are meant to build empires and some people are meant to maintain old houses. Both are important. Heart emoji, prayer hands emoji, house emoji. The condescension was so thick I could have spread it on toast. They were so convinced they'd won. So absolutely certain that their 12 million in stock was the prize and my farmhouse was the consolation trophy for the loser who'd done all the work. I looked at the brass key in my palm, feeling its weight, its promise of secrets. Then I looked at the smaller sealed envelope marked for later, resisting the urge to rip it open right there in my truck like some impatient kid on Christmas morning. But Richard had said the order mattered. And if there was one thing I'd learned about Richard Hawthorne over the past few months, it was that when he said something mattered, you listened. I started the truck, the engine rumbling to life with that reliable working-class growl that probably offended every luxury vehicle in the garage. As I pulled out into the afternoon sunlight, heading toward the highway that would take me to Willow Creek, my phone buzzed one more time. Melissa, again, by the way, we're having the lawyers draw up papers for us to buy that farmhouse from you. We'll give you $80,000, which is way more than it's worth. Consider it a gift. You could really use the money and we can tear it down and develop the land properly. Win-win. I smiled, pocketing my phone without responding. She had no idea what was waiting under that old cider press, what Richard had really left me, what this was actually all about. But she was about to find out. And honestly, I couldn't wait to see her face when she did. The farmhouse was calling. And for the first time since Richard died, I felt something dangerous blooming in my chest. Hope mixed with vindication, anticipation with a healthy dose of you're about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating the handyman. Karma wasn't just running on schedule anymore. It was about to pay dividends. The drive to Willow Creek took about 45 minutes through suburbs that gradually dissolved into actual countryside. The kind where gas stations become scarce and Dollar General stores are considered major retail developments. The farmhouse sat on 12 acres at the end of a gravel road that hadn't been properly maintained since probably the Clinton administration, surrounded by fields that had gone wild and enough trees to qualify as a small forest. It was the kind of property that real estate agents would describe as rustic and full of potential, which is code for bring a contractor, a priest, and low expectations. I hadn't been out here since Richard got sick, and pulling up to the place hit me with this weird wave of nostalgia mixed with apprehension. The house itself was exactly as everyone described. A 2-story white farmhouse that had definitely seen better decades with a wraparound porch that sagged in places, shutters that hung at angles that defied both physics and any sense of aesthetic harmony, and a roof that looked like it was holding on through sheer stubbornness and possibly spite. The paint was peeling in spots, giving it that haunted by the ghosts of better maintenance decisions vibe that every old farmhouse eventually achieves. But here's the thing nobody understood about this place. Richard had loved it. Not in the way his daughters love their penthouses or luxury cars, but genuinely loved it. He'd told me once during one of our late-night morphine philosophical conversations that this farmhouse represented everything he'd built his empire to escape from and everything he wished he'd never left behind. Progress isn't always forward, Travis, he'd said. Sometimes it's just expensive. I parked in the overgrown driveway, grabbed my flashlight from the truck bed because country properties don't believe in adequate lighting, and headed for the front door. The key Richard had given me months ago still worked. The lock clicking open with that satisfying sound of old mechanisms that were built back when things were made to actually last instead of planned to obsolete in 3 years. Inside, the house smelled like dust, old wood, and memories nobody had bothered to visit. The furniture was covered in white sheets like ghosts of a life Richard had maintained but never really lived in these last few years. The living room had a stone fireplace big enough to roast a small cow, hardwood floors that creaked with character, and windows that looked out over the property with views that probably cost millions in other zip codes, but here just came with mosquitoes and property taxes nobody wanted to pay. I made my way through the house to the basement door, which was hidden in the back of the kitchen behind what looked like a regular pantry, but was actually a false front. Because, of course, Richard had secret passages in his farmhouse. The man couldn't do anything straightforward if his life depended on it. The door swung open with a horror movie creak that would have made any self-respecting ghost proud, revealing wooden stairs that descended into darkness thick enough to cut with a knife. The basement was unfinished. All concrete floors and exposed beams with that particular smell basements have. That's part earth, part mildew, and part something definitely died down here once. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating cardboard boxes labeled in Richard's handwriting. Christmas decorations 1987. Tax records. Keep forever apparently. And my personal favorite, Melissa's childhood art. Terrible, but she cried when I tried to throw it out. And there in the far corner, exactly where Richard said it would be, sat the old cider press. It was this massive contraption made of dark wood and iron, probably weighing several £100, looking like something that belonged in a museum exhibit about agricultural history, titled How Our Ancestors Turned Apples into Alcohol Before They Invented Therapy. I walked over to it, running my hand along the warm wood, and noticed for the first time what I'd missed 3 years ago. Wheels. Heavy-duty industrial caster wheels had been installed on the base, hidden by the shadows, and deliberately positioned to look like they were just part of the original structure, but these were new, modern, probably rated for serious weight. Richard had modified this thing specifically to be moved. I pushed and the cider press rolled aside easier than I expected, smooth and silent like it had been oiled recently, which it probably had been. Knowing Richard and his attention to detail, he'd probably been maintaining this secret right up until he couldn't get out here anymore. Underneath, set into the concrete floor, was a trapdoor, not some old wooden thing you'd expect in a farmhouse basement, but a modern steel door with a brushed metal finish, complete with a keyhole that looked like it belonged on a safe deposit box and a small keypad that glowed faintly blue in the darkness. "You magnificent, sneaky old bastard," I whispered, pulling out the brass key Richard had left me. The key slid into the lock like it was coming home, turning with a solid click that echoed in the basement. But the door didn't open. The keypad blinked, waiting for a code. Of course, there was a code. Richard wasn't about to make this too easy, even from beyond the grave. I stood there thinking, my mind racing through possibilities. Richard's birthday, too obvious. The company's founding date, maybe, but that felt too corporate for something this personal. Then it hit me. The date Richard had taken me to the farmhouse the first time, the day he'd shown me around and told me about his grandfather building this place with his own hands. It had been his father's birthday, October 7, 1924. I typed in October 7, 1924. The keypad beeped once, turned green, and the steel door clicked open with a hydraulic hiss that sounded like a bank vault in a heist movie. I pulled the door up, revealing a ladder descending about 8 feet into what looked like a small concrete room. LED lights flickered on automatically as I climbed down, motion activated, illuminating a space about 10 feet by 10 feet that looked like it had been carved out and poured specifically for this purpose. The walls were lined with metal shelving, and sitting on those shelves were plastic storage containers, filing boxes, and a small safe built directly into the concrete wall. My hands were shaking again as I opened the first container. Inside were legal documents, dozens of them, all organized with colored tabs and labels in Richard's meticulous handwriting. I pulled out the first folder and the label made my heart stop. Hawthorne Holdings, Private Assets. Travis Michael Donovan, Managing Director. Managing Director. Me, Travis, Mr. Average Donovan, the guy who fixed garbage disposals at family gatherings and got introduced as the handyman with no ambition. I opened the folder with hands that had forgotten how to be steady. Inside were incorporation papers for something called Willow Creek Holdings LLC, established 6 years ago with me listed as the managing director and sole beneficiary upon Richard's death. There were stock certificates, real estate deeds, offshore account information with banks I'd only heard about in movies about international espionage, and investment portfolios that made my eyes water. I grabbed another folder. This one was labeled Liquid Assets Transfer Complete. March 14th. The date was 1 day before Richard had updated his will, right before he'd call me to come over and help him organize some paperwork. I thought we were just filing old tax returns. Turns out we were orchestrating the financial equivalent of a magic trick where the rabbit disappears from one hat and shows up in another, except the rabbit was $9.4 million. $9.4 million. I had to sit down on the concrete floor because my legs just quit working. The number was right there in black and white, printed on official bank statements, verified by Miriam Lopez's signature as the accountant of record, dated and notarized, and absolutely, completely mind-blowingly real. While Melissa and her sisters had been fighting over designer handbags and posting filtered selfies about family values, Richard had been quietly liquidating portions of his holdings, moving assets around like a financial chess master, creating this entirely separate entity that nobody knew about except him, his accountant, and apparently now me. There was a letter paper clipped to the bank statements handwritten on the same cream stationery as the letter in the car. Travis, surprise. This is what they missed while they were too busy measuring the curtains in their inheritance. I spent 6 years moving money, selling off pieces of the company nobody paid attention to, investing in properties and portfolios that actually made sense instead of just looking good on paper. Willow Creek Holdings owns 17 commercial properties, has investments in 4 different continents, and controls enough liquid assets to make my daughter's $12 million look like pocket change. The company they got, it's a shell, kid. The pretty exterior with nothing but debt and my stubbornness holding it together. You got the heart. Use it wisely. Make something that matters. And when Melissa inevitably calls you crying for money in about 6 months, feel free to remind her that karma keeps excellent receipts. R.H. I sat there in that secret underground room surrounded by evidence of Richard's final masterpiece. And I laughed. I laughed so hard I scared what sounded like mice or possibly raccoons in the basement above me. I laughed until tears rolled down my face and my stomach hurt and I couldn't breathe right because Richard Hawthorne, the complicated man his daughters had eulogized without knowing. The millionaire everyone thought they understood, had pulled off the most beautiful, vindictive, absolutely perfect con I'd ever seen. He'd given them exactly what they wanted. The company, the prestige, the title of Hawthorne Industries heir ISIS. And in doing so, he'd given them nothing but a sinking ship with their names on it. And me, the average handyman, the son-in-law with no ambition, the guy who'd shown up and made terrible soup. I got the empire they didn't even know existed. I climbed out of that secret room, closed the trap door, rolled the cider press back into place, and walked out of the basement into the late afternoon sunlight, feeling like I just discovered I was the protagonist in a story I didn't know I was in. My phone buzzed. Another text from Melissa. Travis, seriously, think about our offer. $80,000 is really generous for that dump. You could pay off your truck. I looked at my phone, then at the farmhouse, then at the 12 acres of worthless property that came with a secret $9 million trust fund and enough investments to make me rethink my entire understanding of wealth. I typed back. I'll think about it. But what I was really thinking was, Richard, you magnificent, devious, absolutely brilliant old man. You really did save the best for last. And somewhere, I swear I could hear him laughing. I called Miriam Lopez at 7:30 the next morning because I'd spent the entire night lying awake in bed staring at my ceiling, my brain doing mathematical gymnastics it wasn't qualified for and coming up with numbers that seemed impossible. Melissa had been snoring next to me, dead to the world, after spending 3 hours on the phone with her sisters planning how they were going to restructure Hawthorne Textiles and maximize shareholder value, which I'm pretty sure meant firing half the staff and buying themselves corner offices with views that cost more than those employees' annual salaries. Miriam's number had been in one of the folders in the secret basement vault written on a business card that was so old school it might as well have been carved on a stone tablet. Miriam Lopez, CPA, when you need someone who actually understands numbers and won't steal your money. That was really her tagline. I loved her already, and we hadn't even spoken. She picked up on the second ring, her voice sharp and alert like she'd been awake for hours, probably because she had been. Accountants are a different breed. They wake up at 5:00 a.m. voluntarily, and think recreational spreadsheet organizing is a valid hobby. Travis Donovan, she said before I even introduced myself. I've been waiting for your call. Took you longer than Richard predicted. He said you'd find the vault within 24 hours. It's been 36. Traffic was bad. I said, which was a lie, but also somehow felt true emotionally. She laughed. This sharp bark of amusement that sounded like she'd spent too many years dealing with rich peoples to be surprised by anything anymore. Can you meet me at Rosie's Diner off Highway 42 in an hour? We need to talk and I need to see your face when I explain exactly what you just inherited. It's going to be fun for me. I mean, you're probably going to need several cups of coffee and maybe a paper bag to breathe into. Rosie's Diner was one of those classic American establishments that looked like it hadn't been remodeled since Eisenhower was president and wore that fact like a badge of honor. Red vinyl booth with duct tape holding together the seats, a checkerboard floor that had seen better decades, and a jukebox in the corner that probably still played actual vinyl records if you pumped enough quarters into it. The coffee was served in thick ceramic mugs that could double as weapons in a pinch, and the menu featured things like Trucker Special and the Heart Attack platter with no irony whatsoever. Miriam was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a laptop open, 3 manila folders stacked beside her, and a cup of coffee that looked like it could strip paint. She was in her mid-50s with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, wearing glasses that hung on a chain around her neck and a blazer that said, "I'm professional, but I will also fight you if necessary." She had the look of someone who'd spent decades watching wealthy people make terrible decisions and had stopped being surprised by human stupidity sometime during the dot bubble. "You must be Travis," she said, looking up from her laptop with eyes that assessed me like I was a tax return. She was auditing for discrepancies. "Sit. Order something. You're going to need calories for this conversation." I slid into the booth across from her just as a waitress who looked like she'd been working there since the Carter administration appeared with a coffee pot. Her name tag said, Deb. And she poured my coffee without asking if I wanted any, which is the kind of service I can respect. "What will it be, honey?" Deb asked, her voice carrying that particular rasp of someone who'd smoked a pack a day for 40 years and wasn't about to apologize for it. "Pancakes," I said. Because when your life is imploding in the best possible way, you eat pancakes and bacon. Lots of bacon. "Smart man," Miriam said as Deb walked away. "You're going to need protein and carbs for what I'm about to tell you." She closed her laptop, pushed it aside, and pulled the manila folders in front of her like a dealer about to reveal a winning hand. "So, you found Richard's little treasure trove. How'd that feel?" "Like I was in a movie, except I'm pretty sure the budget was higher and the plot made more sense," I said, wrapping my hands around the coffee mug. "Miriam, what the hell did Richard do?" She smiled. And it was the smile of someone who'd been waiting years to watch this particular bomb go off. "What Richard did, Travis, was spend the last 6 years of his life orchestrating the most beautiful screw you to his daughters that I've ever witnessed in 30 years of accounting for wealthy families. And trust me, I've seen some impressive family warfare. Once watched a guy leave his entire estate to his cat just to spite his kids. But Richard was playing a different game entirely." She opened the first folder, spinning it around so I could see the contents. It was a timeline meticulously documented, showing asset transfers dating back 6 years. "Richard came to me in 2019, Miriam explained, her finger tracing down the dates. Said he wanted to restructure his holdings because he didn't trust his daughters to manage real wealth. They were already fighting over designer clothes and country club memberships, and the company was still running fine with him at the helm. He could see the writing on the wall. When he died, they'd tear everything apart, fighting over scraps and status. So, he started moving money," I said, scanning the documents. "Not just moving it, transforming it. Richard was brilliant, Travis. Most people think textile manufacturing in America is dead, right? Outsourced to Bangladesh and Vietnam, race to the bottom, all that depressing economic reality. And on the surface, that's exactly what Hawthorne Textiles looked like. A struggling legacy company barely holding on through Richard's sheer stubbornness and some loyal contracts he'd maintained through relationships built over 40 years. She pulled out another folder, this one thicker, but what nobody knew. Not his daughters, not the board, not even most of his employees, was that Richard had been quietly selling off the profitable parts of the company piece by piece. He'd identify a division that was actually making money, spin it off into a separate entity under Willow Creek Holdings and replace it with debt and underperforming assets back in the main company. Like performing surgery on a business, removing all the healthy organs, and leaving behind a pretty corpse that looked fine from the outside, but was basically running on fumes and inherited reputation. My pancakes arrived, and I forgot they existed. So, the company the girls got is a beautiful, prestigious shell worth about $12 million on paper, but actually carrying $8 million in debt that's structured to come due over the next 3 years. They got the Hawthorne name, the headquarters building, which is mortgaged to hell, some equipment that's outdated, contracts that are barely profitable, and a workforce that's going to need massive restructuring to stay solvent. In short, they got a full-time job that pays terribly and comes with a ticking time bomb of financial obligations. And I got the empire's heart, Miriam said, leaning back with satisfaction. 17 commercial properties generating passive income across 3 states. A minority stake in a Vietnamese textile manufacturer that's actually killing it. Richard got in early, by the way, before it was cool. Investments in sustainable farming operations, tech startups focused on fabric innovation, even a small but growing online custom clothing platform that's positioned perfectly for the next decade of retail, plus the liquid assets. $9.4 million in diversified portfolios that survived the 2020 market crash beautifully because Richard was paranoid and smart about risk management. I finally took a bite of pancakes, but they tasted like cardboard because my brain was too busy exploding. "Why me?" I asked. I'm a contractor. I build decks and renovate kitchens. I have no business managing millions of dollars." Miriam smiled softer this time. "That's exactly why he chose you, Travis. You're not blinded by the money because you didn't grow up with it. You understand the value of work because you've actually done it. And more importantly, you showed up. You sat with a dying man, changed his oxygen tanks, made him terrible soup that he complained about but ate anyway because it came from someone who actually gave a damn." She reached across the table and put her hand on mine, her grip firm and warm. "Richard told me about you, Travis, about how you'd tell him jokes to distract him from the pain. How you'd watch those old westerns with him even though you probably thought they were boring as hell. How you treated him like a person instead of an ATM or an obligation. He said, you were the only one who saw him as Richard instead of as Richard Hawthorne, textile magnate." My throat felt tight. I just didn't want him to die alone. "And that," Miriam said, squeezing my hand once before pulling back, "is exactly why you're sitting here with a $9 million trust fund. And they're sitting with a company that's about to teach them very expensive lessons about what real work actually looks like. Richard didn't just give you money, Travis. He gave you opportunity. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" I looked down at the folders, at the documentation of Richard's years-long plan, at the evidence that someone had believed in me more than I'd ever believed in myself. "I have no idea," I admitted. Good, Miriam said, raising her coffee mug in a toast. That's the first step to not screwing it up. The second step is hiring me to continue managing your accounts because honey, you seem like a good guy, but I wouldn't trust you to balance a checkbook without adult supervision. I laughed, actually laughed, and clicked my mug against hers. Deal. But I have one question. Shoot. Does Melissa know any of this yet? Miriam's smile turned absolutely wicked. Oh, Travis. The trust became public record yesterday when it was officially transferred to you. So, she knows you got something more than a farmhouse. She just doesn't know exactly what yet, but she will. Very, very soon. How soon? Check your phone. I pulled out my phone and there were 17 missed calls from Melissa, 12 from Tiffany, and 9 from Lauren, plus approximately 47 text messages that I'm pretty sure violated several communication decency laws. Miriam laughed, that sharp bark again. And that, Travis, is what we call reality setting in. Welcome to the empire. Try not to let it go to your head. But it was too late. I was already grinning. I decided to spend the afternoon at the farmhouse after my meeting with Miriam. Partly because I wanted to explore the property with fresh eyes now that I knew it came with a $9 million bonus package, but mostly because I needed somewhere to be when Melissa inevitably figured out what had happened and came looking for blood. The farmhouse seemed like neutral territory, or at least territory where I could see her coming from a distance, and prepare myself emotionally. I'd stopped at a grocery store on the way and picked up the ingredients for lemonade. Real lemonade, not that powder crap from a jar. Because if I was going to face down my wife's inevitable meltdown, I was going to do it while sipping something refreshing and pretending I had my life together. There's something deeply satisfying about making lemonade from scratch when life has just handed you the metaphorical equivalent of a lemon orchard in a sugar factory. I was sitting on the farmhouse's front porch in an old rocking chair I'd found in the barn, watching the sun start its lazy descent toward the horizon and feeling pretty damn philosophical about everything. When I heard the sound of tires on gravel moving way too fast for a residential road, the sound got louder, angrier, like the vehicle itself was pissed off. And then Melissa's white Mercedes SUV came flying around the bend doing at least 50 on a road that suggested 25 if you valued your suspension. She slammed on the brakes hard enough. That gravel sprayed everywhere, creating this dramatic cloud of dust that would have been perfect for a movie entrance. Except this was real life and way more terrifying. The driver's door flew open before the dust even settled. And Melissa emerged wearing designer jeans that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, heels that had no business being worn on a gravel driveway, and an expression that suggested she was about to commit a felony and felt completely justified about it. "You stole it," she screamed, storming toward the porch with her finger pointed at me like a weapon. "You manipulated him. You poisoned his mind against us. You." She was so angry she couldn't even finish the sentence. Just stood there at the bottom of the porch steps vibrating with rage and expensive perfume. I took a long, slow sip of my lemonade, letting the silence stretch out like taffy, and then calmly said, "Nope. Your dad gave it to me. Maybe because I actually changed his oxygen tanks instead of my outfit every 3 hours." Her face went from red to purple, which I didn't even know was possible on a human being outside of cartoon characters. "Don't you dare act self-righteous with me, Travis. We know what you did. We talked to Charles Henderson and he confirmed that Dad set up some trust fund for you months before he died." While we were grieving, I interrupted, setting my lemonade down on the porch railing. "You were on a work trip in Austin photographing yoga pants. Tiffany was in Seattle finding herself or whatever rich people call avoiding responsibility these days. Lauren was posting thirst traps on Instagram and calling it content creation. I was the one here, Melissa. Me alone doing the actual work of caring for a dying human being. We couldn't handle it emotionally," she shouted. And I swear she actually believed that. Like emotional unavailability was a valid excuse for abandoning your father. "You know, hospitals trigger my anxiety. My therapist said, 'Your therapist doesn't know your dad died thinking his daughters cared more about handbags than him,'" I said quietly, and that landed like a punch. I could see it in her face, the flinch, the moment of doubt before the anger rushed back in to cover it up. Before she could respond, 2 more vehicles pulled up. Tiffany's black Audi and Lauren's red Tesla because of course they'd carpooled their rage. The sisters emerged like a well-dressed mob, their heels clicking on gravel in synchronized fury. "Travis," Tiffany yelled, marching over with her phone already out like she was documenting evidence for a future lawsuit. "We demand to see the documentation for this so-called trust fund. Our lawyers say we have grounds to contest it based on undue influence. Your lawyers are going to charge you about $500 an hour to tell you what I'm about to tell you for free," I said, standing up and leaning against the porch post. Your dad was completely mentally competent when he set this up. Miriam Lopez, his accountant who's been with him for 30 years, will testify to that. Charles Henderson, the family lawyer you've known since you were kids, will confirm it. You don't have a case. You have hurt feelings and expensive legal bills. Lauren had her phone out, too, filming everything because apparently the girl couldn't experience reality without documenting it for her followers. This is elder abuse, she announced to her phone camera. Her voice taking on that performative quality influencers use when they're pretending to be passionate about something. Financial manipulation of a vulnerable senior citizen. My followers need to know about this. Accountability is important. Perfect, I said, smiling directly at her camera. Make sure you post it with the caption, "How to lose $9 million in 9 months by abandoning your dying father." Really captures the essence of your family values. Very on brand. That stopped her cold. She lowered the phone, her perfectly contoured face scrunching up in confusion. What do you mean 9 million? Charles said it was a trust fund, not Travis. How much did Dad leave you? And there it was, the moment I'd been simultaneously dreading and anticipating since Miriam had laid out the numbers for me at Rosie's diner. I could have been diplomatic about it. I could have softened the blow, been the bigger person, taken the high road. But you know what? Screw the high road. The high road doesn't get you anywhere when you're dealing with people who've spent years treating you like the help. 9.4 million, I said clearly. In liquid assets alone, plus 17 commercial properties, minority stakes in several profitable businesses, and investments across 4 continents. Willow Creek Holdings, I'm the managing director. Your dad spent 6 years building it while you were busy posting about gratitude and manifesting abundance without actually understanding what either of those words meant. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear birds chirping in the trees behind the house. It was like someone had hit pause on reality and forgotten to press play again. Tiffany spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. That's impossible. The company was worth 12 million. We got the company. The math doesn't. The math works fine when you understand your dad gave you a sinking ship with a pretty paint job. I explained, enjoying this way more than I probably should have. Hawthorne Textiles is carrying 8 million in structured debt. He gutted the profitable divisions and moved them under Willow Creek Holdings. You got the name, the prestige, and a whole lot of financial problems that are going to start coming due in about 18 months. Congratulations on your inheritance. Hope you kept the receipts on those celebration outfits. Melissa's legs seemed to give out. She actually sat down on the porch steps, her designer jeans getting dusty, her face blank with shock. He wouldn't do that, she said. But her voice had lost all its conviction. He loved us. He was our father. He did love you, I said. And I meant it. But he loved you enough to teach you a lesson you desperately needed to learn. You can't just show up for the good parts, Melissa. You can't go someone when they're dying and expect to inherit their respect along with their money. Life doesn't work that way. Karma doesn't work that way. Tiffany had her phone to her ear now, probably calling her lawyer, pacing back and forth in the driveway, and hissing about litigation and legal options. Lauren had started crying. Actual tears, which was shocking because I didn't think she was capable of genuine emotion that wasn't curated for social media engagement. We deserve our share, Lauren sobbed, mascara running down her face in black rivers. We're his daughters. We're his blood. You're just the guy who married Melissa. You're nothing. And that right there, that entitled, spoiled, completely lacking in self-awareness statement was exactly why Richard had done what he did. You're right, I said calmly. I'm just the guy who married Melissa. The guy who showed up, the guy who made soup and changed oxygen tanks and watched old westerns at 2 o'clock in the morning because your dad couldn't sleep and was scared of dying alone. I'm nothing special, Lauren. I'm just someone who actually gave a damn. Apparently, that was special enough for Richard. Tiffany stormed back over. Her lawyer apparently not answering because it was Sunday afternoon. And even attorneys who charge by the breath need time off. This isn't over, Travis. We're going to fight this. You're going to waste money you don't have on lawyers who will tell you what I already told you. I interrupted. But hey, it's your financial funeral. I'll send flowers. They'll be nice ones, too, because unlike you, I can actually afford them now. Melissa stood up slowly, dust falling from her jeans, her face a mixture of anger and something that might have been betrayal. I want a divorce, she said quietly. Yeah, I replied, not even surprised. I figured I'll make it easy for you. You can keep the house, the cars, whatever. I don't need any of it. But just so we're clear, Melissa, you're not getting a dime of Richard's money. It's in an ironclad trust that specifically excludes you in the event of divorce. Your dad thought of everything. Even this conversation probably. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Or maybe like she was realizing she'd never actually seen me at all. "You've changed," she said. "No," I corrected her. "I just stopped pretending I was okay with how you treated me." Big difference. The three of them left together, a defeated trio, climbing into their luxury vehicles and pulling away much slower than they'd arrived, leaving behind nothing but dust and the faint smell of expensive perfume that got carried away by the evening breeze. I sat back down in the rocking chair, picked up my lemonade, and took a long drink. It had gotten warm, but it still tasted like victory. The farmhouse creaked around me, settling into the evening, and somewhere in the fields beyond, I heard an owl starting its nightly haunt. For the first time in 8 years of marriage, I felt peaceful. The divorce papers came through in record time, mainly because Melissa wanted out faster than a shopaholic leaving a store that just announced it's going out of business. She signed everything without contesting, probably because her lawyers had explained in very expensive detail that fighting me would cost more than whatever she might win, which was exactly nothing. I kept Richard's trust and the farmhouse. She kept our suburban house that I'd never really liked anyway, her Mercedes, and enough furniture to stage a moderately successful estate sale. We split the marriage assets down the middle like civilized adults who'd stopped pretending we'd ever actually liked each other. And just like that, 8 years of matrimony dissolved faster than my faith in the institution had about 6 years prior. 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I sat down with Miriam Lopez and Charles Henderson in what was rapidly becoming my favorite conference room at Henderson and Blay. The small one on the third floor that didn't have pretentious art on the walls and had a coffee maker that actually worked without requiring an engineering degree to operate. We brought in lunch from a local deli because this was going to be a marathon meeting, the kind where you need pastrami sandwiches and actual sustenance to make it through discussions about corporate restructuring and asset management without your brain leaking out your ears. "All right," Miriam said, spreading papers across the table like a general planning a military campaign, which wasn't far off from what we were actually doing. "Let's talk about what you want to do with Willow Creek Holdings, Travis, because right now you've got a collection of assets that are making money, sure, but they're not really doing anything meaningful. They're just existing. Richard built you a foundation, but now you need to decide what kind of house you're building on it." I've been thinking about this for days, lying awake at night in the farmhouse that was slowly starting to feel like home instead of just a building I'd inherited. Richard had given me resources, yes, but more importantly, he'd given me an opportunity to do something that actually mattered instead of just existing in someone else's shadow. The question was, what did Travis Donovan actually care about? "Sustainable farming," I said, surprised by how certain I sounded. "And textile restoration, but the right way." Richard told me once that his grandfather had started the company because he wanted to make clothes that lasted that people could pass down to their kids. Quality over quantity. But then the market changed, fast fashion became a thing, and the company had to adapt or die. Except adapting meant compromising everything his grandfather had built the company on in the first place. Charles Henderson leaned forward, his glasses catching the light. He'd taken off his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and looked more human than I'd ever seen him in his natural lawyer habitat. "You want to go back to that original vision? Make Willow Creek Holdings about quality textiles and sustainable practices." "Not just quality textiles," I said. The idea forming even as I spoke it out loud. "I want to create a model that proves you can make money and do good at the same time. Local textile manufacturing using sustainable materials. Partnering with small farms that are doing things right instead of factory farms that are destroying the environment. Create jobs in communities that actually need them instead of outsourcing everything to the cheapest labor market we can find." I know it sounds idealistic and probably stupid from a pure profit standpoint. It sounds exactly like something Richard would have done if his daughters hadn't pushed him toward maximizing quarterly earnings. Miriam interrupted and she was smiling. "Travis, you have $9 million in liquid assets and 17 income-generating properties. You've got the financial cushion to take risks that most startups can't afford. And more importantly, you've got something even more valuable. You give a damn. That's surprisingly rare in business." Over the next 3 hours, fueled by pastrami sandwiches and coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of despair, we mapped out a 5-year plan for Willow Creek Holdings. We'd restructure it into a proper investment firm with a focus on sustainable agriculture and ethical textile production. We'd partner with that Vietnamese manufacturer Richard had invested in early, the one that was already doing things right, and use them as a model for expanding into domestic production. We buy out struggling small farms and convert them to sustainable practices, creating a supply chain that actually made sense both environmentally and economically. Miriam suggested we bring in a consultant who specialized in B Corp certifications, companies that meet rigorous standards of social and environmental performance. Charles recommended we talk to a friend of his who ran a nonprofit focused on rural economic development. Someone who could help us identify communities where our investment could make the biggest impact. I sat there taking notes like I was back in college. Except this time the subject was how to use inherited wealth without turning into the thing you always hated, which definitely wasn't offered at my community college. We should also fix up the farmhouse, I said during a lull in the conversation. Make it the headquarters for Willow Creek Holdings. Nothing fancy, just restore it properly. Solar panels, energy efficient everything. Turn it into a working example of what we're trying to promote. The optics on that are perfect, Charles said, nodding. Billionaire as fancy downtown office runs empire from restored farmhouse. The media will eat it up. I'm not a billionaire. I protested. I've got 9 million, not 900 million. Miriam laughed. Honey, to 99% of America, you're absolutely a billionaire. Embrace it. Use it. Just don't let it turn you into an I hired a local contractor, not a big corporate firm, but Jake Morrison, a guy I'd worked with on various projects over the years, who understood the difference between renovation and destruction. Jake showed up to the farmhouse 3 days later with his crew, took one look at the place, and let out a low whistle that contractors reserve for projects that are either going to be really fun or really expensive. Sometimes both. Travis, my man, Jake said, walking around the porch and poking at boards with a professional skepticism that comes from years of discovering problems hiding under pretty facades. This place has good bones, but we're talking a full restoration here. New roof, electrical upgrade, plumbing that doesn't date back to when Truman was president. You sure you want to dump money into it? I'm sure, I said, but I want it done right. Energy efficient, solar panels, the whole sustainable 9 yards. Make it a house that Richard's grandfather would recognize, but wouldn't feel outdated in. Can you do that? Jake grinned. Can I do it, brother? I've been waiting my whole career for a client who actually wants to do things properly instead of whatever's cheapest. When do we start? Yesterday, I said, and his grin got wider. The renovation took 3 months, and watching that farmhouse transform was like watching someone go from barely surviving to actually thriving. New roof with solar panels that made the place look like it was part spaceship, part farmhouse. Windows that were actually energy efficient instead of decorative holes that leaked heat and money. Plumbing that worked on the first try without making sounds like a dying walrus. Fresh paint, not stark white, but a warm cream color that looked like sunshine and optimism had a baby. And on the front porch, Jake installed a custom-built swing made from reclaimed wood that could hold 3 people comfortably or one person having an existential crisis about inherited wealth, which was becoming my new favorite hobby. People in town started noticing Willow Creek wasn't exactly a metropolis. Population hovered around 3,000 on a good day when everyone was home and someone wasn't visiting relatives in the city. So, when someone dumps money into restoring the old Hawthorne farmhouse and starts a business that's creating actual jobs, word spreads faster than gossip at a church potluck. Frank, Richard's old neighbor, stopped by one afternoon while I was sitting on the new porch swing with my laptop, pretending to understand the quarterly reports Miriam had sent over, but mostly just appreciating that I owned a porch swing now. Look at you, Frank said, climbing the porch steps with the careful deliberation of an 83-year-old who'd fallen once and wasn't eager to repeat the experience. The farmer CEO, that's what people are calling you down at the hardware store. Travis Donovan, the contractor who inherited a fortune and didn't immediately turn into a jackass. You're a local legend, son. The farmer CEO, I repeated, testing the phrase out loud. It sounded ridiculous and perfect at the same time. Like a nickname you initially hate but eventually grows on you like moss on a tree. I like that. Sounds way better than Mr. Average. That's what Richard's daughters used to call you? Frank asked, settling into the rocking chair I'd left out specifically for him since he'd started making these visits a regular thing, among other things, I said. Most of which I can't repeat in polite company. Frank chuckled. That raspy laugh of someone who'd smoked for 50 years, quit 30 years ago, and still sounded like he was working through it. You know what Melissa's been calling you lately? Do I want to know? Probably not. But I'm going to tell you anyway because I'm old and don't care about social niceties anymore. She told someone at the grocery store that you're a manipulative con artist who stole her inheritance through elder abuse. Direct quote Cheryl Staff last month trying to cut costs, but it's like putting a band-aid on a bullet wound. Word is they're going to file for bankruptcy by end of year. I nodded watching the sun sink lower toward the horizon, painting the fields gold and orange. I didn't feel happy about it. Exactly. But I didn't feel guilty either. Richard had given them exactly what they'd asked for, control of the company, and what they did with it was their responsibility, not mine. Richard knew, I said quietly. He knew exactly what would happen. He gave them enough rope and trusted they'd hang themselves with it. Smart man, Frank said. Mean as hell, but smart. We sat there in comfortable silence. Two men on a porch watching the day end. And I realized this was exactly what I'd been missing in my old life. This peace, this simplicity, this feeling that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. The farmer CEO. Yeah, I could live with that. 6 months after the divorce, Hawthorne Textiles Incorporated started imploding like a building in a controlled demolition. Except nobody was controlling anything, and it definitely wasn't going according to plan. Melissa and her sisters had managed to turn their $12 million inheritance into a masterclass on how not to run a business, which would have been impressive if it wasn't so predictable. First, they'd fired the senior management team, people who'd been with the company for decades and actually knew what they were doing because they wanted to bring in fresh perspectives. Those fresh perspectives turned out to be Tiffany's boyfriend, Chad, who they made marketing director despite his only qualification being that he'd once tried to sell NFTs of cats wearing scarves. That venture had failed spectacularly. But apparently, the Hawthorne sisters believed in second chances when it came to unqualified men they found attractive. The financial reports that crossed Miriam's desk, because of course she still had industry connections feeding her gossip, read like a horror story written by someone who'd never heard of budgets. Melissa had renovated the executive offices for $2 million. Lauren had launched a failed influencer marketing campaign that cost $500,000 and generated exactly 0 sales. Tiffany had invested in a revolutionary fabric that turned out to be regular polyester with better branding. The debt Richard had carefully structured to come due started arriving like bills after Christmas. Except instead of credit card statements, it was millions of dollars in loans that nobody had bothered to prepare for. Employees started jumping ship. Clients found other suppliers. The stock price, which had been traded privately among family and investors, plummeted faster than my faith in humanity every time I checked the news. Then came the bankruptcy filing. Chapter 11. Restructuring the whole 9 yards of corporate failure. The headlines wrote themselves: Hawthorne Textiles falls apart under new leadership, and my personal favorite, sisters inherit empire, immediately drive it into ground. My phone rang at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. Melissa's name lit up the screen, and I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. Travis, she sobbed, her voice thick with tears and what sounded like expensive wine. Please, I need help. We lost everything. We can start over together, right? We were good once. I looked out at the farmhouse fields, peaceful under moonlight. Melissa, I'm not mad at you, I said calmly. I'm just allergic to stupidity. Then I hung up politely like a gentleman. A year after Richard died, I found myself sitting on the farmhouse porch watching the sunset bleed gold and crimson across fields that had finally been properly cultivated. Willow Creek Holdings was thriving. We'd partnered with 12 local farms, opened a small textile manufacturing facility that employed 60 people from the community, and turned a profit while actually giving a damn about the planet. The farmer CEO thing had stuck, and honestly, I'd stopped fighting it. But success felt hollow without someone to share it with. So, I drove to Oakwood Cemetery that evening, parking near the massive oak tree that shaded Richard's grave. His headstone was simple granite. Nothing ostentatious, just his name and dates with the inscription he'd requested. He showed up. I placed fresh flowers beside it. Wild flowers from the farmhouse property because Richard would have hated expensive florist arrangements, and sat down on the grass like we were having one of our old conversations. You played the long game, old man, I said softly to the headstone. And you won. The girls filed for bankruptcy last month. Melissa's working retail at some boutique, which is ironic considering she used to spend more there monthly than they probably pay her yearly. Tiffany's boyfriend Chad left her for someone with actual money. And Lauren's follower count dropped when people realized she wasn't wealthy anymore. Turns out authenticity doesn't monetize well when you're broke. A breeze rustled through the oak leaves, and I swear it sounded like Richard's raspy laugh. You didn't just leave me money, I continued. You left me purpose, meaning a chance to build something that actually matters instead of just existing in someone else's shadow. The farmhouse is beautiful now. You'd love it. Solar panels, sustainable everything, and that porch swing gets used daily. Sometimes I sit there and imagine you're sitting next to me making sarcastic comments about oatmeal brands and government incompetence. As I stood to leave, evening light caught the headstone inscription, and suddenly everything clicked into place. The inheritance wasn't the money. It wasn't the properties or investments or any of the tangible wealth Richard had transferred. The real inheritance was the lesson. Show up. Be present. Give a damn when it's hard. Build something that outlasts you. I turned toward my truck and I swear I heard his voice on the wind. Told you to hang in there, kid. The fields glowed gold. Birds sang their evening songs. And for the first time in forever, I laughed loud, free, and genuinely happy because karma hadn't just arrived. It had compounded with interest. Story 2. After my wife's betrayal, I fled back to my granny's old house from my childhood. A few days later, an unexpected visitor fought through the blizzard to find me and said, "Get your coat. You're coming with me." I heard the man's voice before I even shut the door. Then her laugh. Too high, too sharp. It didn't sound like how she used to laugh when it was just us and cheap wine and movie nights. The coats weren't mine. 2 of them slung sloppy over the armchair, boots under the radiator. Our Bluetooth speaker was running her party playlist, the one she always blasted when she wanted to feel 20 again. I didn't need more than that. I stood in the kitchen looking at the 2 wine glasses on the counter, lipstick on one. His voice again, muffled, coming from the bedroom. She didn't even close the door. She walked out in a black tank top, barefoot, not even startled. She leaned against the doorframe like I was just another errand she forgot to handle. "You've been distant for months, Caleb," she said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Married to deadlines." I didn't say a word, just stared at her for half a second longer than I should have, then grabbed my keys and my laptop bag off the chair. "Seriously, that's your move?" she called after me. I didn't turn around. Didn't slam the door either. I walked out into the wind. Snow was already coming down hard, hitting sideways against the cars lining Maple Street. I walked 3 blocks without thinking, past the diner, past the shuttered florist, until I stopped under a busted street light and just stood there breathing. That's all I could do without screaming. I felt like a complete fool. My own place was still rented out. I'd signed the lease through mid-February to float my half of the mortgage on our shared condo. Tiffany said we needed options if things went south. Guess she was already planning her exit. I turned around and went to the only place I could, the office. Northlight Press was dead quiet that time of night. I swiped in and took the back hall to my edit bay, pulled the blackout curtains, dimmed the desk lamp, and opened my laptop like the world hadn't just kicked me in the ribs. I couldn't even get into my own apartment. I just sat there trying not to picture what she was doing in that bed. Hank Wells, our night security guy, knocked twice and handed me a mug of peppermint tea without saying a word. He's one of those old union men who know when to talk and when to shut up. I nodded. He nodded back. That's all we needed. By morning, she was there. Tiffany in my office, standing like she owned it, like she hadn't ripped the floor out from under me 12 hours earlier. "You didn't come home," she said, arms crossed like I was a teenager who missed curfew. Very unprofessional. I kept quiet and stared past her at the blank wall. Her tone shifted. "Quiet now, just for me. Without me, you're nobody here, Caleb." Right on cue, Joseph walked in. That fake slick smile of his, like everything's a photo op. He always hovered around Tiffany, always called himself a consultant, like that meant anything. "We're restructuring," he said, sliding into my space. "Consolidation of verticals, brand refresh, nothing personal." Tiffany stepped closer and said it plain. "Consider this your separation from duties. HR would be in touch." I kept my back straight. "I'll take my personal files and my final check." She smirked. "Hank's under instruction not to let you back in." By noon, my badge stopped working. I stood at the glass doors holding my laptop bag like it was a lifeline. Hank buzzed me out, his eyes low. He texted one word after. "Sorry." As I stepped into the wet snow, someone brushed past me in the lobby. Black wool coat, heels clicking like she knew exactly where she was going. Tina Brooks, the owner's daughter. She didn't recognize me, but I knew her face from every investor deck I'd ever been forced to read. She stopped just long enough for us to shake hands. Her grip was warm. Then that thing hit me. The static, the tight pull in my ribs, the warning. I saw it clear as a headline behind my eyes. A black SUV nose down in a drift. Steam rolling off the hood, smoke curling in the cabin. Mile marker 42. I let go of her hand. "Don't take your Range Rover north tomorrow," I told her. She tilted her head. "I've got a 10 o'clock in Albany." "Then don't take that car," I said. "Not north. Not tomorrow." She blinked once, real slow, then walked away. I told myself it was just nerves, just editorial gut. But the picture stuck in my chest like a lit match and it wouldn't go out. The lock didn't click. I tried twice hard and it was useless. Tiffany had changed it. I stood there on the stoop with snow hitting sideways. One hand on the knob, the other stuffed in my coat. And I just laughed once, short and mean. She'd done it fast. Same day fast. That was her. When she cut you loose, she didn't leave a fray. Nothing left but bone. I waited 15 minutes like a stray. My nose burned and my jeans were damp to the knee. Nothing. No lights came on. No apology. No second thoughts. I gave up. Got back in my Subaru and aimed north. Grandma's place sat 86 miles out past the state road and the river cut. Out where the highway ends and the land flattens like paper. She raised me out there. No parents, no safety net, just her. A small garden and a fireplace that ran hot until it didn't. She used to say, "This house will hold you when people won't." I kept both hands on the wheel and my eyes on the lines. The heater coughed, the engine wah-head on hills, but it kept moving. Wind battered the glass like fists. That whole drive, not once did I think about where my career went. I only thought about how quiet the house was going to be and whether the roof patch had held. An hour out, the county road started disappearing under drifts. I made it as far as the plow berm and had to park it. Beyond that, the tires spun, and I wasn't about to die, proving a point. I got out, wrapped my scarf high, and started walking. Each gust sliced like a blade. The snow stung through my gloves. I counted fence posts and focused on the ground. About halfway, I heard something I wasn't expecting. A weak voice, then a hollow thud. I looked down the ditch and saw Barbara Miller face down in the snow, bags scattered, one boot missing. Her coat was half open, groceries in the ditch, canned beans, paper towels, a bent loaf of bread. Her glasses were askew, lenses frosted. She'd known me since I was 12. Gave me peanut brittle on Christmas. I yelled her name, got nothing but a groan. I couldn't carry her, not without dropping her. My fingers were already numb. I scanned the road, then saw an old sled leaned against a fence like someone meant to fix it one day and forgot. It was half cracked and missing a rope. I dragged it over, tied her coat belt to the crossbar, and loaded her on with one bag tucked under each arm. Then I hauled. Step, brace, pull. Step, brace, pull. My hand screamed. Took 15 minutes to reach her place. Eddie opened the door in socks and a flannel shirt, his eyes wild. He helped me get her inside, offloaded the bags, and wrapped her in 2 quilts while muttering, "Stubborn woman." She came to enough to call me her little proofreader, which made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. I told Eddie I'd come back tomorrow with salt for the path. Then I kept going. By the time I hit Grandma's place, I was shaking so bad I couldn't get the key to slide. The lock stuck like always, but the old butter knife trick worked. That first breath inside smelled like cedar dust and stale coffee. The silence nearly broke me. The kitchen window had cracked again. I taped it fast with what was left in the drawer. The logs I'd split back in fall were low, maybe 8 left. I jammed 3 in the stove and lit them with pages from an old phone book. I didn't bother unpacking. I just sat on the floor, hands pressed against the iron, trying to feel something through the gloves. I must have slept about an hour. When I woke up, my hands didn't feel like mine. The skin was pale and waxy, and the knuckles looked wrong, tight, swollen, like balloon joints. I couldn't flex my fingers without pain. I stood dizzy, and that's when the knot came. Not the wind, not a tree limb, a real knock. I opened the door and blinked hard. It was her. Tina Brooks, black wool coat, cheeks pink, hair in a braid, snowflakes clinging to her sleeves. "Are you Caleb Nelson?" she asked like she already knew. I nodded once, then leaned against the doorframe to stay upright. "How on earth did you find me out here?" She exhaled through her nose, shifting her weight. "I called Hank, told him I'd seen you yesterday. He said if it's a storm, you'd come here, gave me the road name, said you were too stubborn to call anybody. Of course he did." Hank's loyalty didn't talk. It acted. She stepped closer, brushing a curl off her forehead. On the northbound, just past mile 42, my driver had to swerve around a van half buried in the drift. "Same spot you warned me about." I let that sink in. My ribs felt tight again. "I turned around," she added. "Moved Albany to later, switched into a sedan, and told my assistant I was checking on something that couldn't wait." Her voice was steady. Not warm, not cold, just sure. By mid-afternoon, I heard it for myself. The scanner app on my phone crackled through the static. Black Range Rover pulled from a snowbank at mile marker 42. Not hers. Same drift, same hour. She caught me watching my hands under the table lamp. They looked worse in the light. Red lines across the joints, stiff and purple near the thumbs. "Get your coat," she said, no hesitation. "I'm not leaving you to lose your fingers." I wanted to argue. Tell her I'd handled worse, that I didn't need help from the boss's daughter, but I didn't say a word. I grabbed my coat and let her guide me outside, down the porch steps, into the car with the heater already running. At the county hospital, she walked straight to the nurse's station and put her card on the counter like it was a shield. "This one needs triage," she said, nodding at me. "He's mine." And just like that, I wasn't drifting anymore. The intravenous drip clicked steady at my side. My hands were wrapped to the wrist, thick and white, like I'd stuck them in cake frosting. I could feel them pulsing, not with pain. Just that weird, numb pressure that told me I was one bad night away from worse. The nurse walked in, grinning like we shared a joke. "Your wife's a force," she said, checking my chart. "I'm not married," I mumbled. She snorted. "Then she's your boss." She left still laughing. Tina was in a plastic chair near the window with a legal pad and pen. No makeup, hair in a knot that had clearly been redone more than once. She looked like she hadn't blinked since I'd passed out. She glanced up. "Your last name?" she asked, tone even. "Nelson?" I nodded once, slow. She nodded back. "Hank confirmed. Said you were stubborn but straight." That tracked. She sat forward, elbows on her knees. "Does that thing in your chest, whatever it is, ever get it wrong?" I shifted on the pillow. "It's not magic. It's just gut instinct. Editor's instinct, maybe. You warned me about the road." "That wasn't gut. I don't call it visions," I said flat. "I don't need to believe in something to use it." "Call it what you want," she said. "I'm listening." She flipped a page on the pad, scanned a note, and let out a breath. "I think Tiffany and Joseph are bleeding Northlight. My mother's been hearing chatter through the foundation. Expenses don't match projects. Things feel off." I didn't move. Just watched her jaw tighten. "I want to build something honest," she said. "I'm done playing inside the machine. I need someone who smells rot before it spreads." I said nothing. "I'll cover your treatment. Give you a desk. Temporary setup for now, war room style. We'll run lean, separate slate, different books." I blinked. "I don't want to rescue." "I'm not rescuing you," she said, voice like steel. "I'm hiring you." The room went quiet. Only the IV drip filled the silence. "My dad wants me to stay on script," she added after a beat. "Keep the deals he signed. Marry the guy he picked looked polished for the shareholders. How's that working out?" She smiled without warmth. "He still thinks Gordon's an asset." I cocked my head. "Why me?" She didn't even blink. "You warned me when you didn't have to. And Hank says you've been carrying an imprint lead's weight for 2 years without a title bump. That's not a guy looking to coast. That's a guy who wants things right." Right then, the doctor came in. Young, fast-talking, clipboard in hand. "Frostnip and some infection risk," he said, flipping pages. "You got lucky. We caught it early. 2 weeks in wraps, some PT after. You'll be near normal by week 6 if you don't do anything dumb. No hero moves." I looked at my hands. "Guess I'll learn to type with oven mitts." He chuckled, scribbled something, and walked out. Tina stood and grabbed a paper cup off the windowsill. "I brought you coffee." I sipped it. It was awful. She opened her bag and pulled out a beat-up paperback. "This manuscript yours?" she asked, flipping to the margin notes. "Final edits before I got canned?" I said. "Author's green but has teeth." She pointed at a sentence I'd circled. "Why this one?" "It's overwritten. Trying too hard." She nodded. "You see straight." I didn't answer. But for the first time in days, my breath came without drag. It wasn't the meds. It was her sitting there asking real questions, reading the pages like they mattered, like I still mattered. 4 days in, she came back with a canvas satchel and dropped it on the tray table beside my water cup. "What's this?" I asked, not touching it. "Board packets, vendor files, some consulting invoices, all too neat, too round, and too vague." "You want me to sniff?" She met my eyes. "Tell me if I'm wrong." I tilted my head. "You're not." She pulled the chair closer. "I've been hunting dead air since last spring. People using old contracts to hide new moves. Joseph keeps recommending vendors he trusts, but every time he says that, I hear a number behind it." "You said your mom heard rumors about what?" "Middleman deals, kickbacks, soft build hours, basically old school skimming dressed up like optimization." "And you think Tiffany's in it with him?" "I think she runs it and Joseph's her inside arm." That lined up with what I'd suspected for months, but never had proof of. Every time I'd flagged a contract, Tiffany buried it in meetings or rewrote the scope to look clean. Tina pushed the satchel closer. "I need a second set of eyes. Someone who's been inside but isn't scared of the names." I asked the question I hadn't wanted to out loud. "What about Gordon?" She leaned back like the question left a bad taste. "He thinks I'm setting up a passion project." Said I should focus on foundation optics and leave ops to real players. That is language. Every word. I shifted, wincing. You don't want a project. You want a reckoning. She didn't deny it. I'm in, I said. But only if I see the whole map. No half routes. You'll get it. Everything I have. I reached out with both bandaged hands and nudged the satchel closer. My knuckles throbbed, but I needed to touch it. Needed to feel like I still had skin in the game. This one, I said, flipping through the stack and pulling a line item invoice marked consulting third quarter rollover. Smells like bleach. She grinned, eyes tired but sharp. I knew it. She gave me the guest room on the second floor. Window facing a half-bare maple. Room was plain. Fresh paint, clean sheets, no art, just a folding chair and a sturdy desk. Like she knew I'd use both. This is not charity, she said, standing in the doorway. Clock starts at 9 sharp. I'm up before that anyway, I told her. I know, she said, and shut the door. The next morning, I heard him before I saw him. His laugh echoed off the walls. Gordon Barnes, perfect posture, perfect teeth, loafers even inside. His kind of confidence wasn't built, it was performed. When Tina introduced us, he didn't shake my hand. Just looked me up and down like I was a contractor who tracked dirt. So, this is the editor, he said. The one with the psychic weather reports. Tina didn't flinch. I didn't either. He leaned in a little. What do you do now? Goes to write horoscopes? Read tea leaves between chapters? I looked at him once, then went back to my coffee. At dinner, he tried again. Question after question how long I'd been out of work. Whether I liked living off charity, if Tina was starting a side imprint or a rescue shelter. Tina set her fork down and spoke without looking at him. He's my pilot. He's here because I asked. Gordon smiled wide, showed all his teeth, and shut up. After that, things settled into a rhythm. Mornings. I reviewed vendor packets with a spatula stuck under my arm because my hand still hated gripping anything tighter than a coffee cup. I made an omelet on the third try, burned the first, over-salted the second. Tina ate the burnt one and said it tasted like pride. I almost believed her. The townhouse wasn't rich. Not like you'd expect from someone in her position. No marble, no glass walls or expensive sculptures. Just dry erase charts taped to the fridge. Timelines and names on index cards stuck to a corkboard in the hall. One shared printer. No assistants. She ran meetings at the kitchen table. 40 minutes max. No tangents, no buzzwords. It felt like breathing real air after years of choking on slogans. One afternoon, Joseph just showed up. Claimed he was dropping by to say hi, but the way he scanned the kitchen said otherwise. Tina kept it polite. I kept my eyes on the folder I was tagging. Then he pulled a slick white card from his jacket and slid it toward her. New auto service partner, he said. Same group we're trying to use across fleet. You should get ahead of it. Standardize. I picked up the card, scanned it fast. Same logo from the vendor list I'd flagged 2 days earlier. One of the shell companies. He'd used an old return label address from before we locked the files. That told me everything. He looked at me like I wasn't supposed to be in the room. I slid the card back across the table. She's not interested. Joseph chuckled. Didn't realize you spoke for her now. She's got ears. She can tell you herself. Tina stood up then. Thanks, Joseph. I've got it from here. He left without pushing. That night, I stopped by Eddie's place after therapy. Left a box of rock salt on his porch with a sticky note. For the ditch path. Sorry again for the sled. No signature, just that. Back at the townhouse, the air smelled like rosemary and something roasting. Tina's mother, Evelyn, was on speakerphone. Her voice was low, slow, bookstore soft, the kind that settles your shoulders without trying. She asked Tina what I'd eaten. Said it like a habit, like she already counted me in. I didn't know what to say to that, so I kept peeling carrots while Tina lied and said I'd made stew. At night, I started sleeping again. Not deep, but real. No more dreams of fog and wire. I dreamed in lines again, scenes that made sense. I told myself the heat I felt in my chest around Tina was relief. Just relief. Gordon started coming home later, always with some donor story, some crisis that needed him urgently. One night he looked pale and talked about a minor health scare his doctor was monitoring. He said the words fast like he'd practiced them. Something in my enzymes, he told us over Rosado. They're watching for early markers. Could be nothing. Could be not nothing. Tina looked concerned but didn't rush to ask questions. The next day he mentioned a therapy. Crazy expensive. He said like $14,800 a round. They're looking at 10 rounds. A week later, it was a different number. Closer to 12 grand, he said this time. Insurance might only cover part, but I'll figure it out. By the third version of the story, he'd landed on 9,600 a week, maybe for 12 weeks, no test names, no facility, just vague clinical terms and shifting math. Tina asked calmly. Do you have paperwork? He nodded. Yeah, I'll send it over. It's in my inbox somewhere. He didn't. The morning after Gordon dodged Tina's request for paperwork, we sat across from each other in a yellow-lit cafe on 3rd. The place smelled like burnt espresso and warm bread, the kind of place where every table wobbled a little. Tina spread papers across the laminate surface like she was mapping a battle. This is the beacon slate, she said, tapping her pen against a hand-drawn chart. Separate from the old books. Clean lines, long-form projects, transparent ad rates, no kickbacks, no middleman add-ons. Every vendor line gets a real scope and a real contract with a real phone number behind it. I looked over the layout. It was ambitious, but it wasn't fantasy. You'll get pushback, I said. People like fog. Fog hides hands. I don't care if they like fog, she said. I care if they can stand in daylight. It felt good to hear it. Really good. I recruited 3 writers I trusted. Nora, Felix, and Darius, plus she, the sharpest copy chief I'd worked with in my old imprint. I told them this was payroll straight. No games, no soft money, no waiting for signatures that never came. They all showed up ready, notebooks out, coats dripping on the carpet of the townhouse. They looked hungry in the best way, hungry for work that didn't involve watching their backs. We spent the rest of that week building the skeleton of the first slate, long-form pieces, narrative essays, a feature series about rural hospitals, a data-driven business report on small-town development. Tina didn't hover. She sat at the far end of the table and asked clean, simple questions. What's the story? What's the angle? What's the timeline? She listened more than she talked, which is rare for anyone raised in a tower of glass. Around midweek, Evelyn dropped by the townhouse with a paper box of scones. She knocked once, then let herself in, calling out, I brought fuel. Before we even looked up. She set the box on the table and looked straight at me. Her eyes were warm and curious, like she was cataloging a new book for a shelf she already loved. You have quiet eyes, she said. That helps you see. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just nodded. Evelyn had that bookstore calm about her. Soft sweaters, gentle voice, but sharp enough underneath that she saw everything without making you feel naked. While the writers brainstormed at the other end of the table, she told me stories about her old book club in a strip mall 20 years back. They'd meet once a week with folding chairs, drink cheap coffee, and keep running tabs for folks who were between paychecks. People paid when they could, she said. If they couldn't, they brought homemade bread or shoveled snow. It balanced out. She said it like the world had once been that simple. Back before deals got slippery and families turned into headlines, I listened harder than I meant to. I kept picturing that life. Straight lines, warm bread, neighbors who didn't cut you loose over optics. At lunch, Tina's phone buzzed with her father's name. She set it on speaker because she hates whispering. Christina, he said, voice deep, sharp, too smooth. I'm hearing chatter about you building an off-book slate. It's not off books. She said it's transparent. That's the point. You are a Brooks. He said there are familial expectations. Stakeholder harmony to consider. Optics with Gordon in the frame. You know how this works. She leaned back in her chair, jaw set. Dad, I resigned from your board in 60 days. Put it in writing. You don't own my decisions. A full beat of silence. Then he hung up. No goodbye, no warning, just gone. Tina stared at the phone a moment, then slid it across the table to me. You ever watch a tether snap and feel relieved? All the time, I said. My grandma used to look off at nothing and say things before they happened. I write it off as gut now, but she called it a gift. Tina tilted her head. Call it whatever helps you sleep. The rest of the afternoon, we combed through vendor lists line by line. I flagged suspicious items. Tina cross-checked board approvals. At one point, she asked if I'd mind reaching out to someone in finance who wouldn't sell us out or tip anything to Joseph. I knew exactly who to call. Leia Chen, VP of Finance, one of the only people in that building who treated numbers like truth instead of a suggestion. She came to the townhouse after work wearing a gray coat and carrying a folder thick with printouts. She didn't waste time on small talk. Show me the names, she said. I slid them across the table. She circled the same lines I had almost instantly. Round numbers, vague scopes, recycled language, identical signatures. These vendors are fake, she said. Or at least repurposed. Somebody's running money through them. Somebody meaning who? Tina asked. Leia gave a tight smile. You want me to say it out loud? Please, Tina said. It smells like Joseph's work, she replied. And whoever's giving him cover. She didn't have to say Tiffany's name. It sat in the middle of the table like a stain. While Tina and Leia discussed next steps, my phone buzzed. Gordon had sent her a picture, a clinic lobby, beige tiles, a wristband on his hand, some generic pamphlet about recovery on the chair next to him. She held the phone up toward me like she wanted a second opinion. I studied the background. The glass pattern on the divider was familiar. That's the spa clinic on 46th, I said, keeping my voice low. They sell sleep pods and vitamin drips, not medical treatment. She stiffened. Just a small shift, but I saw it, felt it in the air. I appreciate you looking, she said quietly. I didn't say more. Not my place. My job was to keep the slate clean, not untangle her relationship with a man who couldn't keep his story straight. Later, after the writers left, and the townhouse dimmed to that warm evening glow, Evelyn pulled me aside in the kitchen while Tina took a call. She poured me tea like she'd done it 100 times. Don't let the big building chew your pieces, she said, stirring her own cup. It tried to chew mine and Tina's. Keep who you are. I'm trying, I said. Some days it feels like holding sand. She smiled. Sand can build foundations if you pack it with purpose. I didn't know how to respond. I just nodded and sipped the tea. It tasted like chamomile and something steadier. When Tina came back into the room, phone still lit in her hand. She looked between us like she knew exactly what had been said, but wouldn't ask. She just sat down, opened her laptop, and motioned toward the pile of notes on the table. Back to it, she said. And we did. We worked until the street lights flickered on outside the window, filling that little townhouse with the kind of focus you can't fake. Clean, sharp, forward. By week 6, I could close both hands again. Still stiff in the mornings, but I was back to typing with real keys and gripping coffee mugs without dropping them. The gauze was off. The work was sharp. The beacon slate had shape now. Real writers on real deadlines, real vendors we could actually verify. That morning, Tina handed me a folder and told me to meet a documentary director 2 towns over. Take the pool forward, she said. It's full on gas. I nodded, zipped my coat, but something in my chest pulled tight. That static again, ribs humming like a low-grade current. My gut, the same one that had screamed under the street lamp outside our old place. The same one that pulled me off that road at mile marker 42, kicked hard. At 8:10 sharp, I looked over at Mason, our new assistant, who was halfway through organizing the courier log. You still heading to the storage unit? Yeah, he said, flipping through labels. Taking the cab since I don't drive stick. You don't need to, I told him. Take the Ford instead. Drop the delivery first. I'll get a cab. He blinked. You sure? I nodded. Just feels like a cab day. He grabbed the Ford keys, gave a thumbs up, and left. At 10:22, Mason called my cell. He was shaking so hard I could barely understand him. Brakes. He said they failed. At the intersection on South and 9th, I missed a box truck by like 3 feet. Rolled right into a snowbank. I'm fine, but man, that car is toast. The tow guy sent pictures. Undercarriage shot, brake line sliced clean, no rust, no slow wear, just a knife cut, fresh and surgical. I told Tina, then drove straight to the garage. We parked the Ford under lock. Leia showed up before I even finished signing the incident form. She walked the bay with the garage manager while I watched from 10 feet back. He won't meet my eyes, she said, walking over. You see that? Every time he lies, I said. She held up a printout. There was a purchase order last month for emergency brake service. Got waived. By who? She flipped it around. Joseph Keene's login dated 3 days before the invoice for fleet tune-ups we'd flagged last week. Detective Reed showed up 15 minutes later. Long coat, Cydia-sued notepad, no small talk. He checked the Ford, logged the photo evidence, and handed me a card. If this gets bigger, I can liaise with County PD, but you're going to need to keep that car preserved. You do not move it. Chain of custody matters now. He tilted his head at Mason's name on the report. Why would someone want your kid assistant dead? I didn't answer right away. Then I said, that car was supposed to be mine. He underlined it in his notebook and nodded once. Slow. Joseph came by later that afternoon with 2 coffees and that fake casual smile like nothing ever stuck to him. Crazy about that, Ford, he said. Good thing our service partner's responsive, huh? He handed me one of the cups like we were buddies again. Then he dropped the name of the same shop he'd pitched Tina at dinner 2 weeks back. Said it like he was just being helpful. I didn't drink the coffee. I went upstairs, opened the archive folder, and printed every invoice we had tied to that vendor. The name traced to a shell set up 6 months ago. No real office. Website was a one-page template with a stock photo of a bay door and a contact form that didn't return calls. The business address, a mailbox store on 3rd. Tina was in the back room when I handed her the file. She didn't flip through it, just looked at the cover page, then went still. Owner on the state filings is Kara Mercer, I said. Tiffany's cousin. Tina's jaw didn't move. She just exhaled slow. Hose data on the website is privacy shielded, I added. But the IP traces to a laptop that logged in from Northlight's guest Wi-Fi 4 weeks ago during one of Joseph's strategy sessions. She didn't raise her voice, didn't panic, just said, "Put this in a folder. Don't send it anywhere yet." "Why?" I asked. "Because timing matters," she said. "And if we're going to set fire to the whole thing, we need it to burn through without smoke." That night, Gordon came home looking like he hadn't slept in a week. Hair messy, pale under his expensive coat. He dropped into the dining chair and said, "Doctor wants me on targeted antibodies. 9,600 a week. Might need 12 rounds." Tina looked up from her tablet. "Did you talk to your insurer?" He nodded like a bobblehead. "There's a hiccup. Coverage gap. Mix up with the paperwork. They're fixing it." Then he leaned forward. "I just need a bridge. 2 weeks. You float me the first 2 and I'll cover the rest." She didn't answer right away. Just tapped her pen once against her water glass. "Bridge loans don't exist between partners," she said. His eyes went wet. "Tina, come on. You know what I'm dealing with. I'm asking for documentation, not a fight. I don't have it yet." "Then you're not getting the money yet." He stood up like he was going to throw something, then stopped. Left the room without another word. I watched the whole thing without saying a word. I still wanted to protect her. Even after all this, even when I knew she didn't need it, even when the lines were this clear, which is a dumb thing to say about a woman like Tina, she didn't need a shield. But something in me wanted to keep her from having to do this alone. So instead of opening my mouth, I made soup, chopped carrots and garlic while Gordon sulked in the spare room, and Tina answered emails like nothing happened. That night, I couldn't sleep. My brain kept running the numbers, the timelines, the angles of the cut line on the Ford. I saw Mason's face on the phone when he called, pale, shaking. Could have been his funeral. Could have been mine. I dreamed of steel, snow, and a gloved hand reaching for a frozen door handle. I woke up in a sweat. I got up, pulled a notebook from the shelf, and wrote down everything I could remember from the dream, the exact position of the van, the sound the brakes didn't make, the shape of the ditch behind the mailbox store. Grandma always said, "Write it down. It matters." I wasn't sure what it meant yet, but I knew the gut didn't lie. Tina's phone rang at 6:31. I was already awake, pouring hot water into a cracked mug when I heard her say, "Mom," and then nothing for a long stretch. Just breathing. She came out of the hallway barefoot, phone pressed to her cheek, face white. "Evelyn collapsed," she said. "In the shop, gripped a shelf. Clerk called 911. EMTs took her in. She's at County General." I grabbed the car keys without asking. The Volvo was blocked in. We rented a 4-door from the corner spot, a heater barely working, and back windows that didn't roll down. Highway alerts said no commercial trucks past exit 4 due to wind. We drove anyway, 3 hours, cold seeping through the seams. I held the GPS while Tina gripped the wheel and asked me to read the texts as they came. One from a nurse. "Stable for now. Mild arrhythmia. She's asking for you." The roads blurred gray-blue trees stiff with frost. We didn't speak more than a handful of words the whole ride. At the hospital, the nurse took us back for a 10-minute visit. Evelyn looked small in the bed, smaller than I remembered. Her hair was messy, and her hands trembled when she squeezed Tina's. But she smiled when she saw us. That same soft smile she gave me over tea the week before. "It's nothing," she said. "Just stress and rhythm. Words that float and mean nothing until someone makes them mean something." She asked if I'd had breakfast. I said, "Not yet." After 10 minutes, they wheeled her off for tests. Tina and I let ourselves into Evelyn's apartment with the emergency key. 1 bedroom, tiny kitchen, a wall clock that ticked too loud. On the corkboard above the table were taped Polaroids of book club nights, 6 women holding mugs, stacks of paperbacks, 1 candle in a jelly jar. She stood in the middle of the room staring at those pictures. "I hate this," she said. "I hate not being able to fix it. "You're here," I said. That's the fix she wanted. We found eggs in the fridge, made them in a dented pan with one wobbly handle. She cracked. I stirred. No talking about Gordon, no emails, just eggs and plates and 2 chipped glasses of tap water. After we ate, she washed the pan and I dried it. The silence was comfortable, like the quiet between old friends. Later, we curled up on the second-hand couch under a thin knit blanket that smelled like lavender and dust. She leaned into me, shoulder warm, face close. We stayed quiet. I'm not a poet, so I won't dress it up. She kissed me slow, careful, honest. I kissed her back. My fingers didn't shake for the first time in weeks. I pulled back just long enough to ask, "Are you sure?" She nodded once. Not soft, firm. We drew the shades. I'll leave it at that. Sometime 4, I woke up to the smell of rain through the cracked window. Tina slept curled toward me, steady, arms tucked tight. I made coffee in Evelyn's old drip pot. It tasted like cardboard and pennies, but I drank it anyway. Sitting in the kitchen staring at nothing. I could see a life here. Small pieces, quiet mornings, grocery lists on fridge magnets. It didn't scare me. Her phone lit up on the counter. A message from Gordon. He'd sent a selfie from a hospital hallway, one of those polished lobbies with brushed metal chairs and sterile lighting. He wore a bracelet and a brave face. The caption said, "Fainted at an event, bad charts, waiting on full panel." It was all performance. The knot in my chest returned. Not fear, something tighter, responsibility, history, lines. When she walked into the kitchen, wrapped in her coat, cheeks still flushed, I handed her the phone. She read it and took a long beat before speaking. I said, "I can't be the other guy in someone's story." "I know," she said. "No triangles, no back rooms, no second lives. You and me, we don't carry half-light. We don't survive it." Her eyes were tired, but she didn't fight me. She just nodded once. Clean. I kissed her forehead, picked up my backpack, didn't make a speech. The drive back to the city was long and silent. I didn't turn on the radio, just counted mile markers and watched the clouds shift like bruises. By the time I reached my place, the sun had dipped behind the buildings and the wind was picking up again. The one bedroom was small but dry. My tenants had moved out finally. The heat clicked on without sputtering. I tossed my bag inside and opened the fridge. Half a carton of milk, a frozen pizza, and 3 leftover ginger ales from some old night I didn't remember. I went heads down, kept working, kept chasing paper trails and calling vendors and building the slate line by line. We had new contracts to vet and distribution deals to clean up. I kept the reports organized, the notes sharp. Tina didn't text. I didn't call. At night, I sat at the edge of my bed and listened to the fridge hum. Wrote notes in a yellow pad and drank bad coffee from the same chipped mug. The silence wasn't heavy, but it pressed in just enough to remind me where I wasn't. And when I missed her, which was most nights, it came in strange places, like the empty hook where she used to hang her coat during war room meetings, or the smell of rosemary when I passed the produce aisle. I missed her in the kitchen, in the emails I almost forwarded, in the jokes I didn't send because no one else would get them. I missed her like a bruise. Quiet but deep. But clean is clean. And sometimes clean has to be enough. Work kept my hands from shaking. I spent the next week building out the editorial calendar line by line. Reconfirmed deliverables with writers, double-checked vendor contracts, pulled old invoices into one shared tracker, and highlighted anything with round numbers or recycled language. I brought in a data stringer. Nora knew a guy who used to pull shell trails for a watchdog blog. He worked quiet and fast. Every time something smelled off, he followed it like a bloodhound. I didn't hear much from Tina, just task notes and timestamps. But the work flowed like it was oxygen. Then at 12:14 a.m., my phone lit up. Text from her. 3 words. Got something. Now I called her. She picked up on the second ring, breath short like she'd just run upstairs. "I was combing through Joseph's trash folder," she said. Auto Recovery caught a draft before he wiped it. "It's a payout routing doc. Consulting fees flagged to a family LLC. Whose family? Kara Mercer. Tiffany's cousin." She sent the file over. Subject line. Fourth quarter engagement structure. Attachments. Spreadsheet. Line item scope vague milestones. LLC address was a mailbox suite in Syracuse. Bank routing matched the deposit we'd flagged last quarter. Leia came in early the next day. I told her what we found. She didn't blink, just said, "Give me 20 minutes. She came back with 3 more. Same pattern. End of quarter bumps, nonsense scopes, no tangible deliverables, Just oversight and audit fees with broad phrases like strategic alignment and vendor continuity. We didn't talk theory anymore. It was fact now. Hina didn't wait for consensus. She built a fake vendor shell. One-page site, dummy email, invoice for $1,280. Legit looking, but just off enough to smell funny. We sent the test invoice through the usual system. Joseph moved it within the hour. He CC'd Tiffany from her personal Gmail. That was the tell. We brought in Detective Reed that afternoon. Evelyn insisted, said there were lines you didn't cross, and this one had been crossed 3 times over. Reed told Tina to keep acting normal. Don't tip anyone. Don't fire anyone yet. Just keep collecting. We mirrored the Gmail thread, exported the CC logs, printed everything with a timestamp. Leia notarized the copies. Company counsel verified chain of custody. Took 4 hours, and every second of it felt like defusing a bomb. Gordon showed up that night with a manila folder and a speech about second chances. Inside was a printed email chain from a clinic in New Jersey, plus a medical form half filled. Letter had said Atlantic Specialty Care, but I recognized the logo from a last year press kit. Hina didn't even open it. She called the clinic, asked for verification. The receptionist checked the date of birth and the name. No record, she said. Wrong branding, wrong format, and the number Gordon gave for the per round cost had changed again. First it was $14,800, then $9,600. Now it was just a lot. His math didn't hold water. Nothing did. She told him to pack a bag. He threw a fit. Knocked a small vase off the windowsill. One Evelyn had picked out from a roadside flea market. The kind of cheap thing that means something when it's been around long enough. You're cold, he said. Hina stood there quiet. No, I'm done. He left with a half-zipped duffel and no eye contact. Joseph showed up 2 days later, said he was just here for a ride. Like that explained anything. He walked in and found Leia, Tina, and one of the lawyers sitting at the dining table with hard copies of the vendor logs. I was at the counter reading timestamps off the mirrored inboxes. He stopped in the doorway, face blank, like a computer that just crashed. Hina didn't give him time to spin. We caught the invoice, the fake vendor, the Gmail CC. He tried to shift it fast. That was Tiffany. I didn't. She told me it was pre-cleared. I didn't know it wasn't. Hina slid the Slack log across the table. You did. His face cracked, eyes wide, mouth twitching like he wanted to argue, but couldn't find a grip. Then he cried. It wasn't an act. He broke in half right there, slid into the chair and covered his face with both hands. Said he was sorry. Said he didn't know how deep it had gotten. That Tiffany made him believe it was survival. That it was just smoothing edges. He gave up everything. The shared drives, the Dropbox folder he thought we didn't know about, backup receipts from his burner phone, even printouts of Slack DMs Tiffany had sent bragging about how she'd keep my boy Caleb where he belongs and how bad breaks are easier than bad PR. That one hit me in the ribs. I didn't react. Just kept my eyes on the logs. Hina stood up and walked to the hallway. She stood in silence for 2 minutes. Then she called her father. She told him flat, I have documented fraud, unauthorized vendor pipelines, and attempted harm. His sigh dragged through the speaker. If there's a way to slow roll this, we should. Appearances matter. The name matters. You're not just a person. You're a legacy. She didn't answer. He went on. If we take our time and manage this quietly, she cut him off. I'm recording this call. Silence for legal record, she added. One party consent. I've saved the file in 3 places. Goodbye, Dad. She hung up. Then she looked at me. I nodded. Let's remove it completely. The Northlight Press all hands was set for a Tuesday. 10 a.m. sharp, fluorescent humming, interim HR on the left, legal on the right. Tina at the front, blazer pressed, sleeves rolled, calm voice, eyes clear. She opened with a simple line. You deserve the full story. Then she laid it all out. Timeline, transactions, names, no euphemisms, no shielded terms. She didn't say errors or lapses in judgment. She called it what it was, fraud, collusion, endangerment. Leia took over for the vendor flows. She showed the paper trail like she'd rehearsed it in her sleep. 4 LLCs, dozens of invoices, a dozen pass-through accounts. She ended with a mirrored Slack message from Joseph, admitting he'd smoothed the process for a friend with family ties. People in the room stopped blinking. Detective Reed stood in the back, arms folded, next to a county officer in plain clothes. They didn't move. Not until Tiffany was halfway through her rebuttal. She called the sting invoice entrapment, said it was innovation under pressure, and threw in that I was a scorned junior with delusions of legacy. That one almost made me laugh. I didn't. I just stepped forward, clicked the projector remote, and pulled up 4 vendor filings with her signature on every last one. Silence followed. Not long, but long enough to hear the breath leave her body. Then the cuffs came out. Joseph didn't look at me when he signed the cooperation agreement. He didn't apologize either, and I didn't expect him to. That's on him. By sundown, Gordon had posted a Notes app screenshot with the usual self-preservation script, vague mentions of mental health, pressure, and being led astray. Not one word about Tina, not one about the company. 2 clients dropped him that night. At 3:03 in the morning, he texted me. We were both victims of the same system. You more than anyone should understand that. I didn't reply. Nothing to say to a man who saw every wound as a stage light. Tina's father booked a press breakfast at a midtown club and sat behind a polished podium talking about a regrettable chapter in a proud company's history. He wore the usual flag pin, said all the right sentences, paused where he was supposed to. What stuck with people was the fact that Tina didn't stand behind him. Authors notice where you stand. Evelyn gave a speech 3 days later at a community center reading event. No script, no podium, just a small mic and a metal stand and her calm bookstore voice. We pay full price for truth, she said. No discounts for bloodlines. 10 minutes later, our team inbox lit up. 5 independent outlets wanted access to the Beacon slate. We built a fund for Mason, the kid who almost died in my place. We set the target at $25,000. It cleared 31,69 days. Anonymous donation at the top was a perfect match. Tina, I checked in on Barbara every other weekend. Eddie said she'd fallen twice in 3 weeks, even with the salt. I found a rehab facility 27 miles out, modest, clean, safe, and drove her there myself one Sunday morning. She wore 2 coats and called me an unclaimed blessing in front of the intake nurse. Just before I left, she squeezed my good hand and said, "Your grandma would be proud. She raised you square." I didn't say anything, just nodded. Hank Wells left a voicemail 2 nights later. "Saw you on that live panel," he said. "Don't go Hollywood on me, you hear? You start wearing scarves indoors. I'm taking your name off the fishing plaque." I laughed harder than I had in weeks. By the end of the month, the Beacon slate wasn't an idea anymore. It was real. Whiteboards, active contracts, phone lines that rang, the smell of cheap coffee, and dry erase markers. We took turns restocking paper. We walked over to pick up our own lunches. Nothing glossy, nothing inflated, just honest work. The kind that washes you clean if you let it. I was folding laundry. Last load, shirt still warm when she knocked. No driver, no assistant, no carefully worded subject line. Just Tina standing in the doorway of my 1-bedroom in that black coat she wore when it mattered. Hair pulled back, no makeup, no armor. Same look she gave me in the lobby that first week. The one that said, "I've already made up my mind." I opened the door and stepped aside. She walked in slow, looked around the place like she was seeing it for the first time. Books stacked 2 deep on the shelves, the payas plant still trailing across the window ledge, scar on the countertop from when I left a hot pan too close to the edge. She touched the back of a dining chair and said, "It looks like you." And I knew she meant it the way nobody had ever meant it before. She turned to face me. "I don't want a life built for other people. I don't want deals that rot my hands. I don't want the kind of love you hide because the timing is messy." I didn't say anything yet. She wasn't done. "I want something clean. Us on paper in daylight." It hit me low. Not in a painful way, just deep like breath you forgot you were holding. I thought about my grandma sitting on the back steps in winter, cigarette in one hand, thermos of weak coffee in the other. She used to say, "You can call it gut if it helps, but some of us get given extra eyes. Use them for good." I spent years pretending I didn't have them or worse, ignoring what they saw. So, I told Tina the truth. "I can't promise I'll always see what's coming, but if I do, I'll tell you, even if it costs me something." She smiled, soft and sure. "Deal," she said. We sat down at the table, no ceremony, talked like people who had work to do and didn't want to screw it up. We made lists, not dreams, terms. The kind of contracts we'd sign and the kind we wouldn't. How we'd write payment clauses on the 1st and 15th. No floats, no delay buffers, formal anti-kickback language in every single vendor agreement. Transparency in author splits, no shortcuts, no favors, no soft promises at conferences that turned into bad math 6 months later. We kept it real. I told her I'd finalized my exit from Northlight. All the paperwork was signed, boxed, and copied. She told me she'd sent her father the audio file. He'd gone quiet. No follow-up, no media spin. She'd resigned her board seat. Formally dissolved the engagement with Gordon in writing. No loopholes. The townhouse was hers now. Clean. We didn't toast. No playlist. No dancing in the kitchen. We ordered dumplings from a place on 9th Street and ate them on the floor with our backs against the couch. She took my hand halfway through a sesame ball and I could feel the blood moving under my skin where the frost had once burned it stiff. Not a word was said about the past. Just two people in a quiet room on a bare floor making steady choices. I used to think a good ending needed spectacle, confetti, applause, some kind of headline. Turns out a good ending can look like a quiet Tuesday. Like steam off takeout, like someone reaching for your hand without asking. It's enough. And if that same heat rises in my chest again, the one I've spent most of my life pushing down, I won't run from it. I won't give it a fake name. I'll call it what it is, and I'll follow it. Story 3. I was cutting vegetables when my daughter tugged my arm. Daddy. Can I stop taking the pills Grandma gives me? My blood ran cold. My mother-in-law always said they were good for her. Trying not to panic, I told my daughter to bring me the bottle. When the doctor checked it, his face turned ghost white. He slammed the bottle on the table and shouted, "Do you know what this is? Why is she taking this? Who gave it to her, and why?" The late afternoon sun filtered through the kitchen window of the small 2-bedroom apartment, casting pale rectangles of light across the worn linoleum floor. Kevin Ward stood at the counter, the rhythmic sound of his knife against the cutting board filling the quiet space. Carrots first, then celery, then the bell pepper he grabbed on sale at the grocery store that morning. He moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd learned to cook out of necessity rather than passion. Behind him, Leia hummed softly as she arranged her collection of toy animals on the living room carpet. 5 years old, with her mother's dark curls and his own gray-green eyes, she'd been building an elaborate zoo for the past 20 minutes. Kevin glanced over his shoulder, watching her place a plastic giraffe next to a stuffed elephant. Her small hands moving with careful deliberation. Pineford, Minnesota, wasn't much of town. Population barely cracking 4,000. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did, where the diner on Main Street still served coffee and chipped mugs and the hardware store closed at 5 on the dot. Kevin had grown up here, left for college in Minneapolis, and returned when Claire got pregnant. They planned to stay just a few years, save money, then move somewhere with better opportunities. That was 7 years ago. 2 years ago, Claire had been driving home from her shift at the elementary school when a pickup truck ran a red light at the intersection of Highway 71 and Pine Avenue. The doctors said she wouldn't have felt anything. Kevin didn't find much comfort in that. "Daddy." He turned, knife still in hand. Leia stood at the edge of the kitchen, one small hand gripping the doorframe, her expression uncertain. "Yes, sweetheart." She shifted her weight from foot to foot, a gesture he recognized as nervousness. "Can I ask you something?" Kevin set down the knife and wiped his hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle. "Of course. What's up?" Leia took a step closer, then another, until she was standing right beside him. She reached up and tugged gently on his sleeve, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "Can I stop taking the pills Grandma gives me?" Kevin felt something cold settle in his stomach. He crouched down until they were eye level, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "What pills, honey?" "The white ones." Ila's eyes were wide, earnest. "She says, they help me be calm. But Daddy, they make me so sleepy even when it's not bedtime." The cold feeling spread through Kevin's chest. He kept his voice steady even as his pulse began to hammer in his ears. "When does Grandma give you these pills?" "When she picks me up from kindergarten on Wednesdays and sometimes on Saturdays when she visits." Ila's lower lip trembled slightly. "I don't like them. They make everything feel fuzzy." Kevin's mind raced. Donna Halberg, Claire's mother, had been visiting regularly since the funeral. At first, Kevin had been grateful for the help. She'd pick Leia up from school when his shifts at the county planning office ran late, watch her on occasional weekends, bring over casseroles and side dishes when Kevin was too tired to cook. But over time, the help had started to feel less like assistance and more like interference. Donna had opinions about everything. The way Kevin dressed Leia, the food he fed her, the bedtime he'd established. She'd been a nursing aide for 30 years before retiring, and she wielded that experience like a badge of authority, constantly suggesting vitamins, supplements, dietary changes. Kevin had largely ignored it, writing it off as a grandmother's overprotectiveness, trying to keep the peace for Leia's sake. But this was different. This was medicine. "Leia," Kevin said carefully, "do you know where these pills are right now?" She nodded. "In my backpack. Grandma puts them in a little bottle and tells her to keep them safe." Kevin stood up, his jaw tight. Can you show me? Leia led him to the front closet where her purple backpack hung on a low hook. She unzipped the front pocket and pulled out a small amber prescription bottle, the kind you'd get from any pharmacy. Kevin took it from her, his hand steady despite the anger beginning to build in his chest. The label was printed clearly. Donna Halberg. Lorazepam 1 gram. Take as needed for anxiety. Kevin stared at the bottle. Lorazepam. He wasn't a doctor, but he heard of it. It was a benzodiazepine, an anti-anxiety medication, an adult medication. And his 5-year-old daughter had been taking it. He unscrewed the cap and counted the pills. 8 left. The prescription had been filled 3 weeks ago for 30 tablets. That meant 22 were gone. How many does Grandma give you at a time? He asked, keeping his voice calm. Just one, Leia said. But sometimes twice in one day if she says I'm being difficult. Kevin felt his vision narrow the way it did when he was trying very hard not to lose control. He took a slow breath, then another. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. You're not in trouble, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong, but I need you to get your shoes on. We're going to see a doctor. Leia's eyes widened. Am I sick? No, Kevin said firmly, pulling her into a quick hug. But I want to make sure you're okay. That's all. 20 minutes later, they were in his aging Honda Civic, driving toward the urgent care clinic on the north side of town. Leia sat in her booster seat, kicking her feet against the back of the passenger seat, humming a song from one of her shows. Kevin kept one hand on the wheel and the other gripping the prescription bottle, his knuckles white. The waiting room was nearly empty when they arrived. A teenage boy with a badly sprained ankle sat with his mother in one corner and an elderly man dozed in a chair by the magazine rack. Kevin approached the front desk where a young woman with bright red hair looked up from her computer. Hi, I need someone to look at my daughter as soon as possible. What's the emergency? She asked, reaching for a clipboard. Kevin set the pill bottle on the counter. Someone's been giving her medication without my knowledge or permission. I need to know if she's in danger. The receptionist's expression changed immediately. She picked up the phone. Let me get the doctor. Within 10 minutes, they were in an exam room. Dr. Harding arrived shortly after. A man in his early 50s with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Kevin knew him by reputation. He treated half the kids in Pineford at one point or another, and he had a reputation for being thorough and unflappable. But when Kevin handed him the pill bottle and explained the situation, Dr. Harding's calm demeanor cracked. He stared at the label, then at Leia, then back at Kevin. You're telling me someone's been giving your 5-year-old daughter lorazepam? Her grandmother, Kevin said tightly. Without my knowledge. Dr. Harding's jaw clenched. He turned to Leia who was sitting on the examination table swinging her legs. Hi there. I'm Dr. Harding. I'm going to ask you some questions and check a few things. Okay. Ela nodded. The examination took 30 minutes. Dr. Harding was thorough, checking her heart rate, her reflexes, her breathing. He asked her gentle questions about how she'd been feeling, whether she'd experienced any dizziness or nausea, whether she'd had trouble waking up in the mornings. When it was over, he gestured for Kevin to step outside the room. They stood in the hallway, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Kevin, Dr. Harding said quietly, this is a sedative used primarily for adult anxiety disorders and certain neurological conditions. In higher doses, it's used pre-surgery. A child Leia's age should never under any circumstances be taking this medication. Kevin's hands curled into fists at his sides. Is she in danger? She's showing mild symptoms. Lethargy, slower reaction times, some cognitive fogginess, but she's young and resilient. The good news is that if she stops taking it now, these effects should reverse. Dr. Harding paused, his expression grave. However, if she'd continued taking it, or if the dosage had been increased, we'd be looking at serious respiratory issues, potential developmental delays, and significant risks to her central nervous system. Kevin felt the anger surge through him like a physical force. He pressed his palms against the wall, trying to steady himself. Who would do this to a 5-year-old child? The bigger question, Dr. Harding replied, is why? This isn't just negligence, Kevin. This is deliberate. Someone made a conscious choice to give your daughter prescription medication without your consent. Kevin turned to look at the doctor. I need you to document everything. Write it all down. I need an official record. Dr. Harding nodded slowly. I'll prepare a full report. And Kevin, I'm required by law to report this. You understand that, right? Good. Kevin said. Report it. They drove home in silence. Leia fell asleep in her car seat before they even left the parking lot. Her head lolling to one side, her breathing slow and deep, too deep for a child her age. After a late afternoon nap, Kevin carried her inside and laid her gently on her bed. He removed her shoes, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and sat down in the chair beside her bed. The same chair he'd sat in when she'd had nightmares after Claire died. The same chair he'd occupied through countless bedtime stories and whispered conversations about missing mommy. He watched her sleep, his mind racing. Donna had done this deliberately. She'd taken prescription medication meant for herself and given it to a child. She'd lied to Leia, telling her the pills would help her be calm. She'd put his daughter at risk. Why? Kevin had tolerated Donna's interference because he'd thought it came from a place of grief and concern. Claire had been her only daughter. Losing her had broken something in Donna, just as it had broken something in him. He'd made allowances, tried to be understanding, tried to maintain a connection for Ila's sake. But this crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He stayed beside Leia's bed until well past midnight, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest, listening to the soft sounds of her breathing. She slept too soundly, too still, like something precious being slowly drained of life. Kevin made himself a promise in that quiet darkness. He was done being polite. He was done making allowances. Donna had endangered his child, and he would not let that stand. When he finally rose from the chair and walked to his own bedroom, his mind was already working through his next steps. He wouldn't act rashly. He wouldn't confront her in anger. It would be deliberate, strategic, and absolutely unyielding because this wasn't about forgiveness or family unity or keeping the peace. This was about protecting his daughter, and Kevin would do whatever it took. The next morning was Sunday. Kevin woke early, made breakfast, and waited until Leia was settled in front of the television with her cartoons before he got in his car and drove to Donna's house. She lived in a small ranch-style home on Birchwood Lane, a neat beige structure with white trim and a well-maintained lawn. Claire had grown up in that house. Kevin had spent countless dinners there during their dating years, holidays and birthdays and ordinary Sundays. He'd sat at that kitchen table and asked Donna's permission to marry her daughter. Now, as he pulled into the driveway, all he felt was cold determination. Donna answered the door wearing a cardigan and slippers. Her gray hair pulled back in a loose bun. She smiled when she saw him, the same soft grandmotherly smile she always wore. "Kevin, this is a surprise. Is Lila with you?" "No," Kevin said. "I need to talk to you." Something flickered in Donna's expression, but the smile stayed in place. "Of course. Come in. We can talk here," Kevin said, not moving from the front step. The smile faltered slightly. "What's this about? You look upset. You gave Lila sedatives." The words hung in the air between them. Donna's expression froze, her eyes widening just a fraction before she regained her composure. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Donna." Kevin's voice was quiet, controlled. "I found the bottle in her backpack. Lorazepam, your prescription? 22 pills gone in 3 weeks." Donna's hand tightened on the doorframe. "Kevin, I think you're confused. I may have given her some mild calming supplements, something natural, but stop lying." The sharpness in his voice made her flinch. The soft grandmother mask slipped just for a moment, and Kevin saw something else underneath, something colder. "Well," Donna said, her tone shifting, becoming defensive. "Ila has been difficult lately. More emotional, more resistant. You don't always see it because you're at work. I'm just trying to help manage her behavior. You should be grateful." Kevin stared at her. "You could have harmed her. Do you understand that? You could have seriously hurt my daughter." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," Donna said, waving a hand dismissively. "I raised 2 children. I worked in healthcare for 30 years. I know exactly what I'm doing. A small dose of a mild sedative is nothing to panic over." "A small dose?" Kevin's voice rose slightly before he caught himself. "She's 5 years old, Donna. That medication isn't approved for children. Dr. Harding said she could have developed respiratory problems, cognitive issues." "Dr. Harding is overly cautious," Donna interrupted. "These doctors today, they're all so paranoid about everything. Back when I was working, we had common sense about these things." Kevin felt a strange detachment settle over him as if he were watching the conversation from somewhere outside his own body. He studied Donna's face, the tight set of her mouth, the defensive angle of her shoulders, the complete absence of guilt or remorse in her eyes. This wasn't a grandmother who'd made a mistake. This was someone who believed she'd done nothing wrong. "You're not to come near Leia again," Kevin said quietly. Donna's expression hardened. "Excuse me? You heard me. No visits, no phone calls, no contact of any kind." "You can't do that," Donna said, her voice rising. "She's my granddaughter. I have a right." "You have no rights." Kevin cut her off. "You forfeited them when you decided to drug a child. How dare you?" Donna's face flushed red. "I've been there for you since Claire died. I've helped you, supported you, done everything I could for that little girl, and this is how you repay me." Kevin looked at her for a long moment. Really looked at her behind the indignation and the wounded grandmother act. He saw something he'd been too grief-stricken to notice before. A calculating quality, a coldness that had nothing to do with loss or love. He turned and walked back to his car without another word. Behind him, Donna called out, "You're making a mistake, Kevin. You need me. You can't do this alone." But Kevin was already in the driver's seat, starting the engine, pulling away from the house where his wife had grown up. He didn't look back. The following week passed in a strange, tense quiet. Kevin took Leia to school himself, picked her up himself, rearranged his work schedule to eliminate any gaps that Donna might try to fill. He watched his daughter carefully, noting the gradual changes. She seemed more alert, more energetic. Her teacher mentioned that she'd been more engaged in class, more talkative during group activities. The medication was leaving her system. But Kevin couldn't shake the questions that circled endlessly through his mind during those long evenings after Leia went to bed. He'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, turning the prescription bottle over in his hands, trying to understand why would Donna do this. The answer came from an unexpected source. On Wednesday afternoon, Kevin received a call at work from a woman named Patricia Clean. She introduced herself as a laboratory technician at MedTech Research, a private pharmaceutical research facility on the outskirts of Pineford. Kevin knew the place vaguely. It was a small operation, mostly conducting clinical trials and long-term studies for larger pharmaceutical companies. "Mr. Ward," Patricia said, her voice hesitant. "I'm not sure if I should be making this call, but I've been thinking about something for weeks, and after what I heard happened, I felt I had to reach out." "What did you hear?" Kevin asked carefully. "About Donna Halberg, about the medication. I work with her sometimes. She does volunteer consulting for our facility. Data analysis mostly, but Mr. Ward, there's something you should know." Kevin's grip tightened on the phone. "Go on." Patricia took a breath. "For the past 3 months, Donna's been bringing in documentation, detailed logs about a child's reactions to calming medications, sleep patterns, behavioral changes, cognitive responses. We pay participants for long-term observational data, especially for medications where we're tracking extended use patterns. It's usually adult volunteers who sign consent forms. But Donna claimed she had full authorization." The office seemed to tilt around. "Kevin, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," Patricia replied quietly, "that Donna was being paid to document a child's response to sedative medication. She told us she had parental permission. She submitted forms with signatures. We assumed everything was legitimate." Kevin's vision narrowed to a single point. "She was collecting data on my daughter. I can't prove it was your daughter specifically, but the timeline matches. And when I heard about what happened about the medication being discovered, I realized." Patricia's voice cracked slightly. "Mr. Ward, I'm so sorry. I should have questioned it more carefully. But Donna seemed so professional, so knowledgeable. She'd bring in these detailed reports, notes about dosage, timing, and behavioral observations. We pay $500 per month for complete data sets. $500 a month." Kevin set the phone down on his desk and pressed his palms against his eyes. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. This wasn't about helping Leia be calm. This wasn't about managing difficult behavior. This wasn't even about some misguided grandmotherly concern. Donna had been using his daughter as a research subject. She'd been drugging a 5-year-old child and documenting the effects for money. "Mr. Ward." Patricia's voice came through the phone speaker. "Are you still there?" Kevin picked up the receiver. His voice came out steady, almost calm. "I need you to save every piece of documentation you have, every log, every payment record, every form Donna submitted. Can you do that?" "Yes," Patricia said immediately. "Yes, I can. And I need you to write down exactly what you just told me. Dates, amounts, everything." "I will." "Mr. Ward, I'm truly sorry. If I'd known." "You didn't know," Kevin said. "But you know now, and you're doing the right thing by telling me." After he hung up, Kevin sat motionless at his desk for several minutes. Around him, his coworkers typed and shuffled papers and discussed zoning regulations and building permits. Normal work, normal concerns, normal lives. His world had just shifted on its axis. Donna hadn't crossed a line out of ignorance or grief or even misguided concern. She'd done it deliberately, systematically for profit. She'd looked at her granddaughter and seen dollar signs. Kevin stood up, grabbed his jacket, and walked to his supervisor's office. "I need to take the rest of the day off. Family emergency." By 5 o'clock, he was sitting across from Dr. Harding again, this time without Leia. The doctor listened to Kevin's explanation of Patricia's call, his expression growing grimmer with each sentence. "That changes everything," Dr. Harding said when Kevin finished. "This isn't just inappropriate medication use. This is human subjects research without proper consent, approval or oversight and using a child." He shook his head. "Kevin, you need to involve law enforcement." "I know," Kevin said, "but I need documentation first. Evidence. I need this to be airtight." Dr. Harding pulled out a folder. "I've completed my formal report on Leia's condition and the inappropriate medication use. This includes my professional opinion that the medication posed serious risks to her health and development. I'll submit this to Child Protective Services, but you should also take a copy to the police." Kevin took the folder. "Thank you. There's something else." Dr. Harding added, "If what this woman at MedTech said is true, if Donna forged documents claiming parental authorization, that's fraud. That's forgery. Combined with the child endangerment charges. She's looking at serious criminal penalties." Kevin nodded slowly. He felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory, only a cold, resolute certainty about what needed to happen next. "I'm going to make sure she's held accountable," Kevin said. "For all of it." "Good," Dr. Harding replied. "Your daughter deserves that. They all do." Over the next week, Kevin moved with quiet precision. He didn't confront Donna again. He didn't warn her what was coming. He simply gathered evidence piece by piece, building an undeniable case. Patricia provided copies of every document Donna had submitted to MedTech research. The logs were damning detailed observations of Subject L's responses to medication, complete with dates, times, dosages, and behavioral notes. The writing was clinical, detached, treating Leia not as a child but as a data point. Subject L exhibited increased drowsiness within 45 minutes of 1 gram dose. Reduced activity level observed. Compliance with instructions markedly improved. Second dose administered same day due to resistant behavior. Subject became noticeably lethargic. Sleep onset within 2 hours. Week 3. Subject showing consistent response pattern. Minimal adverse effects noted. Continued documentation recommended. Kevin read each entry. His jaw clenched. Fighting the rage that threatened to overwhelm his careful planning. He found more evidence in unexpected places. While picking up some of Ila's belongings that she'd left at Donna's house. A calculated move. Using Yaya's forgotten jacket as an excuse to enter the home, he managed to photograph a small notebook in Donna's study. The notebook contained handwritten notes matching the logs submitted to MedTech along with calculations of monthly earnings and reminders about data submission deadlines. There was even a voice message saved on Donna's phone. Kevin had convinced her to let him use her phone to call his own phone because the battery had died. Where she'd left herself a reminder. Extra income deposited. Finish weekly report on L's sleep patterns. Next submission due Friday. Extra income. That's what his daughter had been to her grandmother. Extra income. When Kevin finally walked into the Pioneer Police Department, he carried a folder 3 in thick. Detective James Rivera, a stocky man in his 40s with kind eyes and a reputation for thoroughness, listened to Kevin's explanation without interruption. Then he spread the contents of the folder across his desk. Dr. Harding's medical report, Patricia's written statement, copies of the logs, photographs of Donna's notes, the prescription bottle, records of MedTech, his payment schedule. Detective Rivera studied each document carefully. When he finally looked up, his expression was hard. "Mr. Ward, I'm going to be very clear with you. What you've described and what this evidence supports constitutes multiple serious crimes. Child endangerment, administering medication without authorization, fraud, forgery. If she signed documents claiming to be your daughter's guardian, that's a felony. And if she was conducting unauthorized research on a minor," he shook his head. "We're going to need to interview everyone involved. The woman at MedTech, your daughter's doctor, possibly even your daughter herself, though we'll do that very carefully given her age. Whatever you need," Kevin said. "I want her prosecuted to the fullest extent possible." Detective Rivera nodded. "I'll be honest with you. Cases like this, they're tricky. Family dynamics, grandparents claiming good intentions, defense attorneys arguing miscommunication. But this evidence," he tapped the folder. "This is substantial, especially the forged authorization documents. That's going to be very hard for her to explain away." "When will you arrest her?" Kevin asked. "I need to consult with the prosecutor's office first. Get arrest warrant issued. Given the evidence, I'd expect that to happen within 48 hours. Detective Rivera paused. "Mr. Ward, I have to ask, does M. Halberg know you've discovered all of this? Is there any chance she might destroy evidence or flee?" "She knows I found the pills," Kevin said. She knows I told her to stay away from Leia, but she doesn't know about the rest. She doesn't know I've gathered documentation or that I'm aware of the research program. Good. Let's keep it that way. The arrest happened on Tuesday morning. Kevin didn't witness it. Detective Rivera advised him to stay away, maintain distance, avoid anything that might complicate the case. But neighbors reported what happened and word spread through Pineford within hours. 2 officers arrived at Donna's home at 7:30 in the morning. She answered the door in her bathrobe, confused at first, then increasingly agitated as they explained the warrant. She tried to argue, insisting there was some mistake, some misunderstanding, demanding to speak to her lawyer. But the officers were professional, firm, unyielding. They placed the handcuffs on her wrists while she stood in her own doorway, still protesting. This is ridiculous. I haven't done anything wrong. This is all Kevin's doing. He's tried to turn everyone against me. Ma'am, one of the officers said quietly, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you exercise that right. But Donna couldn't stop talking, couldn't stop justifying, explaining, minimizing. It's just data collection. Everyone participates in medical research. It's perfectly legal. I had permission. From whom, ma'am? From her father. I had authorization. We have copies of the documents you submitted, Miss Hallberg. The signature doesn't match Mr. Ward's signature on file. That finally seemed to silence her. They drove her to the county jail, processed her, photographed her, fingerprinted her, set her bail at $50,000. Kevin heard all of this from Detective Rivera later that day. He sat in his living room after picking Leia up from kindergarten, holding the phone to his ear, listening to the details with a strange sense of detachment. She's claiming ignorance. Detective Rivera says she thought the forms were legitimate, that she misunderstood the authorization requirements, that she was only trying to help her daughter. Her attorney is already working on a defense of good intentions and procedural misunderstanding. Will it work? Kevin asked. Not with this evidence, Detective Rivera replied. The forged signature, the detailed logs, the payments, the notebook calculations, it all points to deliberate, systematic behavior. This wasn't a mistake. This was planned. What happens next? Arraignment hearing in 2 weeks. She'll formally plead. Given the charges and the evidence, the prosecutor is confident we'll get an indictment. After that, it goes to trial unless she accepts a plea deal. And if she goes to trial, then we present everything, all the evidence, all the witnesses. And Mr. Ward, Detective Rivera's voice softened slightly. You may be called to testify. So, might your daughter, though, we'll try to avoid that if possible. Kevin looked across the room to where Yaya sat on the couch, coloring in her favorite book, humming softly to herself. She seemed brighter now, more present, more herself. The foggy lethargy that had characterized the past few months was gone. Whatever it takes, Kevin said. I'll do whatever it takes. The weeks following Donna's arrest brought a strange new rhythm to Kevin's life. He continued working, taking Leia to school, maintaining the routines that gave their day structure and safety. But underneath the ordinary surface, he felt the constant weight of what was coming. The legal process grinding forward, pulling his family's private trauma into public view. Leia asked about her grandmother only once. They were eating dinner, spaghetti with meatballs, Leia's favorite. When she looked up from twirling noodles on her fork and said, "Daddy, is Grandma sick?" Kevin set down his own fork carefully. Why do you ask that, sweetheart? Because she hasn't visited. And usually when people don't visit, it's because they're sick. Like when Mommy was in the hospital, Kevin felt his throat tighten. Leia had been 3 when Claire died, and her memories of that time were fragmented, confused. She remembered the hospital, the hushed conversations, the adults crying. She'd asked about Mommy every day for months afterward, and Kevin had answered as honestly as he could without crushing her with the full weight of death. Now, he chose his words with the same careful precision. Grandma isn't sick, he said gently. But she made some mistakes. She did things that weren't safe, things that could have hurt you. So, she's not going to be visiting for a while, maybe for a long time. Leia considered this, her young face serious. Is it because of the pills? Kevin's chest itched. Yes, baby. It's because of the pills. Okay, Leia said simply. Then she went back to her spaghetti, apparently satisfied with the explanation. Children, Kevin thought, had a remarkable capacity for accepting the truth when it was given to them clearly. It was adults who complicated things, who layered on justifications and excuses and rationalizations until the truth became unrecognizable. The investigation expanded in ways Kevin hadn't anticipated. MedTech research came under scrutiny from the state medical board. Investigators discovered that the company's protocols for participant recruitment and authorization verification were dangerously lax. Patricia's testimony revealed that Donna had been submitting data for months before anyone questioned the legitimacy of the consent forms. The facility's director, Dr. Nathan Price, insisted that they trusted Donna's credentials and experience, that she'd been a valued consultant for years. But under examination, Dr. Price's confidence crumbled. It became clear that MedTech had been cutting corners, accepting participants without proper vetting, paying for data without adequate oversight. The facility's license was suspended pending a full review. Kevin learned these details from Detective Rivera, who called regularly with updates. The detective had become something of an ally, his professional demeanor occasionally giving way to genuine concern for Leia's well-being. "The prosecutor wants to meet with you," Detective Rivera said during one of these calls. "Her name is Amanda Cross. She's handling the case personally because of the child endangerment component. She's very good, Mr. Ward. Very thorough." Kevin met Amanda Cross on a gray Thursday afternoon in her office at the county courthouse. She was a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner that Kevin appreciated immediately. "Mr. Ward," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you for coming in. I reviewed all the evidence Detective Rivera collected, and I want you to understand that we're taking this case very seriously. What happened to your daughter was a violation of trust, of basic human decency, and of multiple laws." They sat across from each other at a conference table covered with documents. Amanda spread several folders out, organizing them with practiced efficiency. "I need to walk you through what we're charging her with," Amanda continued. "First, child endangerment. That's a felony in this state given the potential for serious harm. Second, administering prescription medication without authorization. Third, fraud. She accepted payment for research participation under false pretenses. Fourth, forgery. She signed her name on authorization documents. And fifth, conducting unauthorized human subjects research on a minor." Kevin listened, his hands folded on the table in front of him, his expression neutral. "The defense attorney," Amanda said, "is already preparing their strategy. They're going to argue that Miss Halber believed she was helping her daughter, that she misunderstood the authorization requirements, that the medication wasn't actually harmful. They'll paint her as a concerned grandmother who made an error in judgment. But that's not what happened," Kevin said quietly. "No." Amanda agreed. "It's not. And we have the evidence to prove it. The detailed logs, the payment records, the calculations in her personal notebook, all of that demonstrates premeditation and intent. But I need you to understand that this is going to be difficult. Juries don't like convicting grandmothers. They want to believe in good intentions. We'll need to be very clear, very precise, and very compelling. What do you need from me? Your testimony will be crucial. You'll need to describe your relationship with Miss Hallberg, the access she had to your daughter, how you discovered the medication. I'll also need you to be prepared for difficult questions. The defense will try to suggest that you're being vindictive, that you're overreacting because of unresolved grief about your wife's death." Kevin's jaw tightened. "Let them try." Amanda studied him for a moment. "Mr. Ward, I can see that you're angry. That's understandable. But when you testify, I need you to be calm, measured, factual. Anger can read as instability. I need the jury to see you as a protective father who made rational decisions to safeguard his child." "I can do that," Kevin said. "Good." Amanda pulled out another folder. "Now, there's something else you should know. Miss Hallberg's attorney has approached us about a plea deal." Kevin's attention sharpened. "What kind of deal?" "They're offering to plead guilty to the medication charge in exchange for dropping the other counts. She'd serve 18 months, possibly less with good behavior." The room was very quiet. Kevin could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, the distant sound of voices in the hallway outside. "No," he said. Amanda raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Ward, I understand your feelings, but 18 months of actual prison time is not insignificant." "No," Kevin repeated. His voice was calm, steady, but absolutely certain. "She doesn't get a plea down. She doesn't get to avoid accountability. She endangered my daughter from money. She forged legal documents. She treated a child like a research animal. I want every charge prosecuted. I want a trial." Amanda held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "All right, I'll inform the defense that we're rejecting the plea offer. Thank you." As Kevin stood to leave, Amanda said quietly, "Mr. Ward, most people in your position would take the plea. They'd want the certainty, the closure, avoiding the stress of a trial, but I respect your decision, and I promise you, we'll make sure the jury understands exactly what she did." The trial was scheduled for late April, for months after Donna's arrest. In the intervening time, Kevin focused on rebuilding Leia's sense of security and normalcy. They established new routines, new traditions. Movie nights every Friday with popcorn and her choice of film. Weekend hikes at the state park where Leia loved identifying birds and collecting interesting rocks. Bedtime stories that Kevin made up himself featuring a brave girl hero who solved mysteries and helped people. Lilac thrived. Her teacher reported that she was doing excellent work in class, making friends, participating enthusiastically in activities. The shadows that had characterized those drug months were gone. But Kevin remained vigilant. He kept the prescription bottle in a locked box in his bedroom. Evidence preserved for the trial. He maintained detailed records of Leia's recovery, sleep patterns, energy levels, behavioral observations. He documented everything, creating a stark contrast between the foggy, lethargic child Donna had been creating and the bright, energetic daughter who had emerged. One evening, Kevin received an unexpected visitor. He answered the knock on his door to find a man in his 60s, tall and thin, with weathered features and uncertain eyes. "Mr. Ward, my name is Paul Halberg. I was married to Donna." Kevin knew who he was. Claire's father, Yaya's other grandfather. The man had left when Claire was 12, divorcing Donna and moving to Oregon. Kevin had met him only twice, at the wedding and at Claire's funeral. "What do you want?" Kevin asked, not unkindly, but not warmly either. Paul shifted uncomfortably. "I heard about what happened about the arrest. I know I have no right to be here, but I wanted to. I needed to tell you something." Kevin studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." They sat in the living room. Leia already asleep in her bedroom. Paul declined the offer of coffee, sitting on the edge of the couch with his hands clasped between his knees. "I left Anna 23 years ago." Paul began because I realized she wasn't who I thought she was. When Claire was young, maybe 7 or 8, Donna started making her sick. Kevin felt his blood run cold. "What?" "Not obviously. Not dramatically, just little things. Giving her medicine when she didn't need it. Keeping her home from school with vague illnesses. Taking her to doctor after doctor, seeking diagnosis. I didn't understand what was happening at first. I thought Donna was just being overprotective, overly concerned." Paul's voice was heavy with old regret. "Then I caught her giving Claire medication that had been prescribed for me, something for my back pain. She was giving it to Claire and telling the doctor that Claire was having unexplained discomfort." Kevin's hands clenched on the armrest of his chair. "I confronted her." Paul continued, "Asked her what the hell she was doing, and she looked at me like I was being unreasonable. Said she was documenting Claire's symptoms for medical research, that doctors needed long-term data, that she was being paid for detailed health journals." He laughed bitterly. "I took Claire and left. Filed for divorce, fought like hell for custody, but Donna was smart. She had a good reputation in the medical community, lots of professional connections. The court gave her primary custody, and I only got summer visitation." "Why didn't you tell someone?" Kevin asked, his voice tight. "I did. I told lawyers, social workers, anyone who'd listened, but I had no proof, just suspicions and concerns. And Donna was very good at playing the victim, at painting me as an unstable ex-husband, making accusations out of spite." Paul met Kevin's eyes. "When Claire chose to stay with Donna after she turned 16, when she shut me out of her life, I figured Donna had poisoned her against me. I tried to warn her when she got pregnant with Leia. Tried to tell her to be careful to watch for signs, but Claire didn't want to hear it. She thought I was bitter about the divorce." Kevin sat back in his chair processing this information. "Claire never mentioned any of this. She probably didn't remember most of it. Donna stopped after I left, stopped making her sick. Claire just remembered that I'd abandoned her, that her mother had been there." Paul's voice cracked. "And now Donna did the same thing to my granddaughter. History repeating itself. And this time, someone actually stopped her." They sat in silence for a long moment. "I'm testifying at the trial." Paul said, "Finally, the prosecutor contacted me. I'm going to tell them everything, even though it's old, even though I don't have proof. Maybe it'll help show a pattern. Maybe the jury will understand that this wasn't a one-time mistake." "Thank you," Kevin said quietly. "Don't thank me. I should have done more years ago. Should have fought harder. Maybe if I had, Claire would have seen the truth. Maybe she'd still be." Paul trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Kevin walked him to the door. Before leaving, Paul turned back. "You're doing the right thing, Mr. Ward. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. That little girl needs someone willing to protect her. Someone who won't compromise or back down." "I won't," Kevin said. "I promise you that." As the trial date approached, Kevin received a call from an investigator working for the prosecution. Her name was Sophie Turner, and she specialized in cases involving medical fraud and child welfare. Mr. Ward, Sophie said, "I've been digging into Ms. Hallberg's background and I found some interesting information. She was fired from 3 different healthcare facilities over the course of her career." Kevin sat forward. Fired for what? The official records are vague. Protocol violations, unauthorized procedures, patient privacy concerns. But I spoke to some former colleagues off the record. One of them told me that Donna had a pattern of conducting unofficial observations on patients without proper consent. She'd document their responses to medications, track their symptoms, compile data. Sometimes she'd adjust dosages without authorization, claiming she was optimizing treatment. Why wasn't she reported to the medical board? She was twice. But the complaints were difficult to substantiate. She'd claimed she was following standard care protocols, that the patients had given verbal consent, that the documentation was for quality improvement purposes. The facilities would settle with disgruntled families, fire her quietly, and that would be the end of it. So, she's been doing this for years, it appears so. And based on what I'm seeing, she got more careful over time, more subtle, using her own family members where questions of consent were murkier, where she could claim she was acting as a concerned relative rather than a medical professional. Kevin felt a cold rage settle over him. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was who Donna was. Someone who saw people as objects, as data sources, as means to an end. Will this be admissible in court? Kevin asked. The prosecutor is arguing that it establishes a pattern of behavior, evidence of intent. The defense will try to exclude it as prejudicial, but Judge Thompson is pretty strict about allowing relevant background information. I think we have a good chance. When Kevin hung up the phone, he sat for a long time staring at nothing. Claire had grown up with this woman, had been raised by someone capable of treating children as research subjects. Kevin wondered how much of Claire's quiet sadness, her occasional withdrawn moods, had been shaped by growing up in that environment. He wondered what scars she'd carried that he'd never fully understood. And he felt a deep, fierce gratitude that Leah would never have to wonder because he was going to make absolutely certain that Donna Hallberg faced the full consequences of her actions. The courtroom was smaller than Kevin had expected, almost intimate in its dimensions. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lighting, rows of benches for spectators. He sat behind the prosecution table with Leah's stuffed owl in his jacket pocket, a small reminder of what he was fighting for. Jury selection had taken 2 days. The final panel consisted of 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from their late 20s to early 70s. Kevin watched them carefully during the opening statements, trying to read their expressions, their body language, their reactions to the evidence being outlined. Amanda Cross stood before them, her voice clear and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about trust, about the sacred bond between a grandparent and a grandchild, about what happens when that trust is violated in the most fundamental way possible." She paused, letting the word settle. Donna Hallberg didn't make a mistake. She didn't have a lapse in judgment. She made a calculated, deliberate decision to use her own granddaughter as an unwitting participant in medical research, administering prescription medication without consent or authorization, documenting the effects and accepting payment for the data she collected. She turned a 5-year-old child into a source of income. The defense attorney, a man named Robert Shunn, tried a different approach. He painted Donna as a confused grandmother, a retired health care worker who'd misunderstood modern protocols, who'd been trying to help a difficult child using methods that have been acceptable during her career. "My client is not a monster," Chin said earnestly. "She's a grandmother who loved her granddaughter, who stepped in to help after her daughter's tragic death, who used her medical knowledge to address behavioral concerns. Did she make errors? Yes. Did she misunderstand the authorization requirements for the research program? Yes, but criminal intent, deliberate harm, those are very different things." Kevin listened without expression. The trial unfolded over the course of 3 weeks. Dr. Harding testified first, explaining in clinical detail the dangers of giving lorazepam to a 5-year-old child. He described Yaya's symptoms when she'd been brought to urgent care, the potential risks she'd faced, the developmental concerns that could have resulted from continued exposure. "In my professional opinion," Dr. Harding said clearly, "the administration of this medication to a child of Leah's age constituted a serious threat to her health and well-being. The dosage, the frequency, the lack of medical supervision, all of it was profoundly inappropriate." Patricia Klein testified next nervously but honestly. She brought the logs, the payment records, the documentation of data submissions. She explained MedTech's research program, the consent requirements, the assumption that Donna had proper authorization. "She seemed so professional," Patricia said, "so knowledgeable. She'd bring in these detailed reports perfectly formatted, clearly written. We had no reason to doubt her." Did you ever verify that she had parental authorization? Amanda asked. Patricia's voice dropped. No, we accepted the forms she submitted. We didn't check the signatures. The forged authorization documents were entered into evidence. A handwriting expert testified that the signature didn't match Kevin's verified signature, that the writing pressure and letter formation were distinctly different. Paul Halberg testified about his experiences with Donnie years earlier, about his suspicions regarding Claire's childhood illnesses, about the pattern of behavior he'd observed. The defense objected repeatedly, arguing that events from decades ago weren't relevant to current charges, but Judge Thompson allowed the testimony as background information. I try to warn people, Paul said, his voice thick with regret. But I couldn't prove anything then. Maybe now with this evidence, people will finally understand what she is. Then it was Kevin's turn. He walked to the witness stand with steady steps, placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, sat down and faced the courtroom. The jury, the judge, Donna, sitting at the defense table with her hands folded and her expression carefully neutral. Amanda asked him to describe his relationship with Donna, the access she'd had to Leah, the discovery of the medication. Kevin spoke calmly, factually, without embellishment or dramatics. He described finding the pill bottle, Yaya's explanation of the medication's effects, the drive to urgent care. He described his confrontation with Donna, her defensive responses, her complete lack of remorse. When I told her she could have harmed my daughter, Kevin said, his voice level. She told me I was being dramatic. She said she knew what she was doing. She said I should be grateful. Did Ms. Halberg ever apologize? Amanda asked. No, not once. Did she ever express concern for Leia's well-being? No, only concern about being accused of wrongdoing. Chun cross-examined him carefully, trying to suggest that Kevin was overreacting, that his grief over his wife's death had made him paranoid, that he'd misinterpreted Donna's intentions. Isn't it true, Mr. Ward, that Miss Halberg provided significant help after your wife died? That she was supportive, involved, caring? She was involved. Kevin agreed. But it turns out she was using that involvement to access my daughter for research purposes. That's not what I asked. That's my answer. Shin shifted tactics. You were angry with Miss Halberg, weren't you? Angry that she questioned your parenting. Angry that she offered advice. I was frustrated sometimes, yes, but I wasn't angry enough to fabricate criminal charges against her. But you did cut off all contact immediately without giving her a chance to explain. Kevin met Chin's eyes steadily. Why? I discovered she'd been drugging my 5-year-old daughter. Yes, I cut off contact. That's what any reasonable parent would do. The cross-examination continued for over an hour, but Kevin remained calm, consistent, unshakable. He didn't lose his temper. He didn't overstate or dramatize. He simply told the truth. When he finally stepped down from the witness stand, Amanda gave him a small, approving nod. Donna testified in her own defense. She sat in the witness box wearing a conservative navy dress, her hair neatly styled, her expression carefully arranged into wounded dignity. Chun led her through her version of events. She'd been a devoted grandmother. She'd stepped in to help after Claire's death. She'd been concerned about Leia's behavioral issues. She consulted her medical knowledge and provided what she believed was appropriate intervention. I never intended to harm her, Donna said. Her voice trembling slightly. I love Leia. Everything I did was out of concern for her well-being. Can you explain the research program participation? Chen asked. I've been volunteering with MedTech for years. Donna said they were looking for long-term observational data on childhood behavioral patterns. I thought I was helping advance medical science while also managing Leia's difficulties. I believed I had authorization. Did you forge Mr. Reward's signature on the consent forms? Donna hesitated. I thought I had verbal permission. When he asked me to help with Leia, I interpreted that as broad authorization. I may have made an error in how I documented that, but it wasn't deliberate fraud. Shin nodded sympathetically. So, but you're saying this was a miscommunication, a misunderstanding of requirements. Yes, Donna said. Exactly. Amanda's cross-examination was surgical. Miss Halberg, you testified that you had verbal permission from Mr. Ward. When exactly did he give you this permission? Donna faltered. Well, it was implied. He asked me to help care for Leia. That's not what I asked. When did he specifically give you permission to administer prescription medication to his daughter? He didn't say it in those exact words. But, so he never explicitly gave you permission? No. But, M. Halberg, you worked in healthcare for 30 years. You're familiar with the concept of informed consent, correct? Yes. And you understand that implied permission is not the same as explicit documented consent for medical procedures. I suppose, but in family situations. Answer yes or no, please. Do you understand that implied permission is not sufficient for administering prescription medication to a minor? Donna's jaw tightened. Yes. Amanda held up one of the log entries. This is from the documentation you submitted to MedTech. It reads, Subject L exhibited increased drowsiness within 45 minutes of 1 mg dose. Reduced activity level observed. Does that sound like the language of a concerned grandmother? I was being professional. But does it sound like someone conducting clinical observations? I was documenting so I could help her better. You wrote about your granddaughter like she was a lab rat. Amanda's voice remained calm, but the words landed with devastating precision. You track her responses. You calculated dosages. You documented sleep patterns and behavioral changes. And you accepted $500 a month for doing it. I needed the money. Donna's composure finally cracked. Do you know how expensive everything is? My pension doesn't cover. She stopped abruptly, realizing what she'd admitted. The courtroom was absolutely silent. So, it was about money, Amanda said quietly. You drugged a 5-year-old child because you needed the money. Donna's face flushed red. That's not I was helping both. Helping Leia and helping research. It wasn't just about, but the money was a factor. I didn't hurt her. Dr. Harding testified that she could have developed serious respiratory problems. That continued exposure could have caused developmental delays. Were you listening to that testimony, Miss Hallberg? I was careful. You gave her medication not prescribed to her. You gave her adult dosages. You gave her multiple doses in single days when she didn't comply with your wishes. That's what the logs show. Amanda set down the document. How is any of that being careful? Donna had no answer. The closing argument stretched through an entire afternoon. Chen did his best, painting Donna as a flawed but well-intentioned grandmother who'd made poor decisions. He emphasized her age, her grief over losing her daughter, her decades of service in healthcare. He asked the jury to consider that mistakes shouldn't be criminalized, that the absence of actual harm should be weighed against the charges. Amanda's closing was precise and powerful. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about whether Donna Hallberg loved her granddaughter. It's not about whether she was sad about her daughter's death. It's not even about whether she believed she was doing the right thing. She paused, making eye contact with each juror. This case is about what she actually did. She took a prescription medication meant for adult anxiety and gave it to a 5-year-old child. She documented the effects. She accepted payment. She forged authorization documents. These are facts supported by indisputable evidence. Amanda gestured to the exhibit spread across the prosecution table. The defense wants you to believe this was a misunderstanding. But look at the logs. Look at the careful documentation. Look at the calculations in her personal notebook. This wasn't confusion. This was deliberate, systematic behavior. This was a woman who looked at her vulnerable granddaughter and saw a business opportunity. She let that sink in. The defense asked you to consider that no permanent harm occurred. But that's only because Kevin Ward discovered what was happening and stopped it immediately. If he hadn't found that pill bottle, if Leia hadn't told him about feeling sleepy, how long would this have continued? How much harm might have resulted? We can't know, but we do know that Dr. Harding testified that serious damage was likely if the behavior had continued. Amanda's voice softened slightly. This little girl trusted her grandmother. After losing her mother, she needed love, stability, safety. Instead, she got medication that made her foggy and tired. She got turned into a research subject without her knowledge or consent. She got betrayed by someone who should have protected her. She walked back to her table, then turned one final time. When you deliberate, I ask you to remember something simple. If a stranger had done this to a child, would we hesitate to call it criminal? Would we search for excuses? Would we suggest it was a misunderstanding? Or would we call exactly what it is, child endangerment, fraud, forgery, and a violation of everything we believe about protecting the vulnerable? She sat down. Kevin watched the jury's faces and saw several of them nodding slightly. The jury deliberated for 2.5 days. Kevin spent that time trying to maintain normally for Leia, taking her to school, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories, but his mind was always partially in that courtroom, wondering what the jury was discussing, what they were thinking, whether justice would prevail. On the third day, Detective Rivera called. They have a verdict. Kevin arranged for a neighbor to watch Leia and drove to the courthouse. The courtroom filled quickly. News of the case had spread through Pineford, and people wanted to see the conclusion. Kevin sat in the same spot he'd occupied throughout the trial. Amanda gave him a brief, encouraging smile. Across the aisle, Donna sat with her shoulders rigid, her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles were white. Judge Thompson entered. Everyone stood, then sat again. The jury filed in, their faces carefully neutral. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Thompson asked. The foreman, a middle-aged woman who'd worked as a high school teacher for 20 years, stood. We have, Your Honor, on the charge of child endangerment. How do you find guilty? Kevin felt something release in his chest. On the charge of administering medication without authorization. Guilty on the charge of fraud. Guilty on the charge of forgery. Guilty on the charge of conducting unauthorized human subjects research. Guilty. Donna made a small sound. Something between a gasp and a sob. Chin placed a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off. Judge Thompson thanked the jury and set sentencing for 2 weeks later. The sentencing hearing was brief. Judge Thompson listened to the defense's plea for leniency. Donna's age, her lack of prior criminal record, her history of service in healthcare. Chin argued that probation and community service would be appropriate, that incarceration would serve no purpose. Amanda argued for the maximum sentence, emphasizing the severity of the crimes, the vulnerability of the victim, the calculated nature of the behavior. Judge Thompson considered for only a few minutes before delivering his decision. Miss Hallberg, I've reviewed the evidence in this case extensively. I've considered your background, your circumstances, your stated intentions, but I keep coming back to one fundamental fact. You treated a child as a source of income. You knowingly gave her medication not prescribed to her. You documented the effects. You accepted payment. And when confronted, you showed no remorse, only defensiveness and denial. Donna sat motionless, staring straight ahead. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. Judge Thompson continued. This was sustained, deliberate behavior over a period of months. You violated the trust of your own grandchild. You endangered her health and development, and you did it for money. He set his jaw. I'm sentencing you to 5 years in the state correctional facility, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You'll be required to complete counseling and will be prohibited from any contact with minors unsupervised. You'll also pay restitution to cover medical and legal expenses incurred by Mr. Ward. Donna's face crumbled, but not with guilt, with anger, with outrage of being held accountable. This isn't fair, she said, her voice rising. I didn't hurt her. I was trying to help. You're all overreacting, Miss Hallberg, Judge Thompson said sharply. I suggest you remain silent. Officers, please take her into custody. 2 bailiffs approached. Donna continued protesting as they led her away, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that everyone was being unreasonable, that she'd been persecuted. Kevin watched her go with no satisfaction, no sense of triumph, only relief, only certainty that he'd done what needed to be done. Over the following months, Leia continued to thrive. She started first grade in the fall, made new friends, joined a soccer team. Her teacher reported that she was bright, engaged, creative. Her drawings were full of color again. Her laughter came easily. Kevin established new routines, new traditions. They started volunteering at the local animal shelter on Saturday mornings, walking dogs, and playing with cats. Leia loved it. Loved the feeling of helping creatures who needed care. Daddy, she said one Saturday as they walked a friendly golden retriever around the shelter's yard. I'm glad we don't see Grandma anymore. Kevin looked down at her, surprised. Yeah, why is that? Because she always made me feel fuzzy and tired, and she looked at me in a way that made me feel small, like I wasn't really a person. Hila was quiet for a moment, throwing a tennis ball for the dog. Now I feel big again, like myself. Kevin crouched down and pulled her into a hug. You're yourself. You're exactly who you're supposed to be. She hugged him back tightly. One evening after Leia was asleep, Kevin sat on the small balcony of their apartment overlooking Pineford Lake. The water was dark and still, reflecting the scattered lights of homes on the opposite shore. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and approaching autumn. He thought about Claire, about how much she would have loved seeing Leia at this age. Curious, energetic, confident. He thought about the trust Claire had placed in her mother, never knowing what Donna was truly capable of. He thought about all the what-ifs, all the ways things might have gone differently. But mostly, he thought about the choices he'd made. He'd acted with precision and determination. He'd gathered evidence, built an undeniable case, pursued justice without compromise or mercy. He'd protected his daughter from someone who'd viewed her as a commodity, who'd been willing to risk her health and development for money. Kevin wasn't a violent man. He didn't revel in vengeance, but he was absolutely unshakably certain that he'd done the right thing. I protected her, he said quietly to the night air. To Claire's memory, I did what you'd want, what any parent would want. The lake was silent, offering no answer, but Kevin didn't need one. He stood, took one last look at the peaceful water, and went inside, checked on Leia one more time. She was curled around her stuffed owl, breathing deeply, safely asleep. Then he went to his own room, feeling a quiet strength settle into his bones. His family had been fractured by someone else's greed and cruelty. But he'd rebuilt it through truth, courage, and an unwavering commitment to protection. And that Kevin knew was enough. That would always be enough.